planned, yet the two countries have also pledged to coordinate closely. Meanwhile, Transneft data show a drop in Russian oil exports is scheduled to accelerate slightly in June. Renita Young, Bloomberg Radio.
West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.6%, lower by 55 cents a barrel, $34.95 on WTI. Gold is up 0.5%, $17.38 the ounce, and again the 10-year, the yield there 0.66%. Investors looking past the weekend of violent protests across major American cities, highlighting what many see as the disconnect between Wall Street and Main Street. But gun-related stocks are higher after a weekend of protests. For instance, among some of those names, Sturm Ruger shares, they are rallying by 10.4%. Smith & Wesson surging 17%. Vista Outdoor up now by 10.2%. It is 1:02 on Wall Street. Time now for the Market Drivers Report with a focus on American depository receipts. And here is Dave Wilson.
Thanks, Charlie. ADRs are rising more than U.S. shares. The S&P ADR index is up 1.3%. And the S&P 500 is higher by 0.4%. Finland's Nokia has risen 6.8% in U.S. trading. The maker of phone network equipment was raised the equivalent of buy from neutral at J.P. Morgan, which cited potential rebounds in profit margins and cash flow. France's Publicis Group has gained 7.3%, and the UK's WPP has added 4.9%. The advertising agency owners are higher after Citigroup said the industry is set for a V-shaped recovery. Another UK company, Pearson, has advanced 8%. The educational publisher was raised to buy from neutral at Goldman Sachs. The firm said Pearson would benefit from a shift toward combining classroom instruction with online learning. And Brazil's Embraer has slipped 1.8%. The regional jet maker said it isn't in talks with Chinese and Russian companies that Reuters named last week as prospective suitors. And Embraer also posted a wider first quarter loss, Charlie.
All right. We thank you very much, Dave Wilson, keeping track of those American depository receipts. Again, recapping here, equities higher with the S&P up 12 now. That's a gain on this Monday of 0.4%. S&P, by the way, at 3,056. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Balance of Power.
Everybody in the world has one common enemy, and that's to win the war against this virus.
The first thing you do is listen to the medical professionals.
Those people that lost their pay, we want to see that pay continued.
Where the world of politics meets the world of business.
Our priority is the health and well-being and the lives of the American people.
We want to make sure that we are continuing to support our hospitals.
We've unleashed our most potent weapon of all, the courage of the American people.
Balance of Power with David Weston on Bloomberg Radio.
Riots rock cities across the country as social distancing quickly steps aside for mass protests, and the nation holds its collective breath to see what the effects on public health and on the economy might be. From New York, welcome to the second hour of Bloomberg Balance of Power. I'm David Weston. The brutal killing of a black man by a police officer in Minneapolis a week ago triggered protests and riots in major cities across the country, from New York to Chicago to Atlanta to Los Angeles, raising important questions about how we police our police, and more broadly, whether the pandemic has made it impossible to ignore the consequences of the inequality that has been growing for a generation now. We welcome now Chuck Rocha. He is president and founder of Solidarity Strategies and a senior advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign. So, Mr. Rocha, thank you so much for joining us. Put this in a larger context of some of the policies that Bernie Sanders and others have espoused. How might they have prepared us for this better, maybe made it unnecessary to have these sorts of divisions in our society?
I think it's been going on for a long time. And I think that nothing overnight. I think there's been politicians who have meant to do well, who haven't got the support in the halls of power to actually take on some of the long-standing racism that we've seen across the country. And right now there's an unease, right? I don't know if there's any one public policy that any one politician could do that would fix where we are today. But we have to turn a corner in this community where I live that is very anxious, right? And you see that in people's faces. Like they're just tired of watching black men get killed in the streets of America, in the most powerful nation in the country, the wealthiest nation in the world, right? Where you have this unbelievable wealth You have a program that covers the stock markets and talks about the gains that America's made under different presidents and the economy. Well, you know who has not felt any of those gains has been the African American community and diverse community. So there's this undertow. So you take this pandemic where unemployment is twice that is in people of color, black and brown neighborhoods, where you have black and brown people dying at 2 and 3 times the rate of other Americans. And then it just gives you this combustibleness, and I hate to use that on a night like we've lived through the last 2 nights, of just this unfairness. And then you get to witness on video what happened, that your program, other programs have openly talked about happening to our country. And it makes me think about the policy and what policy could have been there. Through the night, I talked to several congressmen, and we talked about 3 things. One would be body cams that were mandatory for all police departments to wear, that footage being turned over immediately when something happens. We pay for these policemen's salaries. We pay for their uniforms. My tax dollars does that. We should be able to have a full accountability, right? And second would be an oversight commission that was from the federal area overseeing local police departments. So when there were things that did happen, you took the local piece out, and you had some things that had to happen in an oversight committee that wasn't Democrat, that wasn't Republican, that just made sure that this policing is being done fairly, and you don't have rogue agents or rogue departments that crop up. And then the third thing would be having police that have to live in their community. 90% of the Minneapolis Police Department doesn't even live in the city, and I find that a problem.
Let me raise a 4th thing. Are police unions too powerful? Are they protecting some of the bad apples? Because let's be honest, most policemen are really good people who do their really hard job well. And then there are a few that are really bad. And they have not been able to get those eliminated, apparently, across the country. Is that because, in part, the police unions are too powerful?
I spent my youth working in the union movement in a factory, being a union steward, a division chairman, and then moving up to be a national political director of a major union. And I've watched the unions for everything that makes them so wonderful. There are also things that make them not so wonderful. And I will tell you, when I was a union steward on the shop floor, this is not a police union, this is just a factory union where we made radial passenger tires for your car, a very non-sexy job. And I will tell you, to your point, I spent 90% of my time representing the same 10% of my members because they were just paused. And I find that when you say that, it sticks in the back of my head of being that young factory worker who was spending all my time, trying to protect a few bad seeds that just could never really get their life together. And I think that you are seeing part of that in these police departments, right? And now that I think that another thing I've heard overnight is because of technology and video cameras, a lot of people in the black and brown communities have said this has been going on for a long periods of time. We just didn't have the technology actually capture it. So again, you see this bubbling of unrest.
So we have this issue of policing, no question about it, that you just can't move on too quickly. But if you had all the body cams in the world, you had all the review in the world, it wouldn't have affected the rate of deaths from the pandemic for African Americans and Hispanics. Because as far as I can tell, that's because of where they live, the density where they live, the jobs they have that require them to be in close proximity to others, underlying conditions, poor health care, hypertension, diabetes. What can we do about those issues? Because let's be honest, this has to do with a fundamental inequality that's been growing, as I say, for at least a generation. I go back to about 1980 or so.
I would agree with you there, right? I think that it's all the things that you said, and I don't want to connect the pandemic to what's going on over the last few days and with what happened to George Floyd. I just loop that in as more anxiety, added on more anxiety. But the socioeconomic status of these folks who have to go to work. I'm a leader in the Latino community. We stand in solidarity with Black Lives Matter and our black brothers and sisters. You've seen a lot of press coverage of Latino workers in poultry plants or meatpacking plants that have become essential, as far as our president says, but that are causing us to be like more highly affected when it comes to catching the virus, right? Well, guess what? More poor people work in pork producing plants or in chicken factories. I grew up in the South, as you can tell from my accent, in rural East Texas. Like, there's just more workers, people of color, who have those jobs. And in urban areas, to your point, we're more densely packed, so it's just easier to transmit the job. And we don't talk about this a lot, and we live in multi-generational households.
Yes, also true. Yep. Absolutely right. It's really terrific to have you with us. Thank you very much for joining us. Hope you come back. That's Chuck Rocha. He is from Solidarity Strategies. Coming up here, could the protests around the country derail efforts to get the economy started again? Joe Nocera of Bloomberg Opinion is here with his views, which you've expressed in a fascinating column about exactly what this might mean for the pandemic. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio.
What began in China has expanded worldwide.
Is it China that's going to lead that consumer recovery?
What have we learned?
I'm curious as to what you're monitoring most closely in the news flow.
What can we predict?
Are you seeing a time when you can expect recovery in global travel?
Bloomberg Daybreak Asia.
Do people realize that those numbers are going to get a lot worse?
Tonight at 6 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Okay, kids, Dad's gonna teach you how to dance. First, spread your feet apart. Then, pump your knee, nod your head, shake your hips, and bite your lip ever so slightly. Now, with one hand in the air, point at people with the other hand. I call that the rock star.
Dance like a dad. It's a great way to make a moment with your kids.
Now, make a face like it just smells something bad.
Visit fatherhood.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Market upheavals.
The narrative is driven by uncertainty about the virus.
Political reversals.
It's not clear that some of the Republicans up on the Hill are agreed with the Republican White House.
Economic shifts.
The macro clearly being driven by the coronavirus outbreak.
Everything seems to be in motion.
Will it also mean a global recession in your view now?
But here, you're on solid ground.
Looking forward to guiding you through all of this.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station. The world.
People's Postcode Lottery's 30k a day is back. £30,000 will be won every single day by players in the July draws. That's £30,000 for every player in the winning postcode. Visit postcodelottery.co.uk/radio before midnight on the 18th of June to play in the July draws. PPL managed lotteries on behalf of good causes. 16 plus conditions apply. Play responsibly.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care about each other, about our planet, about creating a better world for everyone, and becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Make sure to accept your offer by the UCAS deadline and visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
The IBM Flash storage solution can be broken down into 3 S's. Speed, retrieve data fast. Scalability, grow your storage as your business grows. Simplicity, easily migrate and integrate with existing systems. Oh, and there's a 4th. It's surprisingly affordable, with a recommended monthly price of £200 for 26 terabytes. Order by the 30th of June and pay nothing for 90 days. Visit ibm.biz/flash offer now.
This is a message from the government about the emergency measures to support the economy during the period of disruption caused by the coronavirus. To help you, your business, and your workers affected, you can apply for cash grants, business rate holidays, statutory sick pay relief packages, as well as the coronavirus job retention and self-employment income support schemes. For information, go to gov.uk/business-support now.
Get your cook on with Asda. With Uncle Ben's rice, 250 grams for just £1. And our Butcher's Selection chicken breast fillets, only £3.40 for 650 grams. Why not whack it in the wok? At Asda, we're committed to low prices every day on the quality products you need. Asda. Selected stores and lines subject to availability.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Ready to talk brass tacks on what's happening in Major League Baseball? Turn to the Effectively Wild podcast from Fangraphs for daily statistics, analysis, and commentary.
One team will say, yeah, we're going to keep paying minor leaguers their stipend, and another team will say, we're going to extend the stipend through this month, and then another team will say, nope, we're cutting them off. So are extending it at least through August, which would basically be the end of the minor league regular season.
Search Effectively Wild on TuneIn to listen.
Hit the court anytime with these great NBA podcasts on TuneIn. The Low Post.
So what struck you about this potential head-to-head matchup? What did we learn now that Zion is involved and LeBron and Zion go at each other for the first time?
You know, I still think both teams have to figure out kind of who are their guys when they get into a fourth quarter. I think you saw that with both of them. There were some kind of odd moments.
The Ringer NBA Show.
Who ended up winning the thing. But I did watch for a little bit when it was DeAndre Ayton and Zach LaVine playing against each other. And then as the days went on, Devin Booker was involved. Tell me you've seen the clip of Devin Booker when I can't remember who his opponent was.
Or the Haber Show.
At the end, it's because I worked in the NBA in the front office, and when I was 14 years old, my family moved back from Sudan to America. I jumped high school here in New York
Find these and more NBA podcasts right here on TuneIn.
24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all higher, all trading at or near the best level of the day. And this update brought to you by SEI. Imagine your asset management firm's operational infrastructure as a competitive advantage. Let SEI show you how at SEIC.com/IMS. Stocks are advancing as investors focus on signs of economic recovery amid further tension with China, lackluster virus drug test results, and the threat of further civil unrest in the United States. Right now, the S&P is up 14 at 3,058, a gain of 0.5%. The Dow now up 93 points, up 0.4%. And NASDAQ is up 71. That is a gain of 0.8%. 10 years down 5/30 seconds with a yield of 0.66%. Gold up 0.4%. 17.37 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.7%. 35.25 a barrel. Again, recapping, equities higher with the S&P up 14, up 0.5%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Bloomberg Opinion, informed perspectives, and expert data-driven commentary on breaking news.
It's time now for Bloomberg Opinion, and today we welcome esteemed columnist Joe Nocera. Joe, thanks so much for joining us. The headline for your piece that was posted actually late yesterday was "Riots Breed Chaos, Violence, and Most Likely COVID-19." You're worried not just about the civil unrest, but also civil unrest in a pandemic.
I certainly am worried about it. We're not out of this yet by any stretch of the imagination. There's still on average 20,000 new cases a day. I think it's a serious concern, and I'm kind of amazed that there hasn't been more talk about it in the public health community.
Yeah, I mean, some of us are old enough, I am, to remember 1967, 1968, where there were terrible riots that went on, but we didn't have the danger of people giving each other a disease. It really does change the dynamic this way, even from the 60s.
Well, I don't think it's changing that dynamic enough. I mean, I really think that's the issue, is that people are just ignoring the fact that there's a pandemic. And I know that the numbers have been coming down, but they've been coming down in large part because people have been practicing social distancing and wearing masks and washing their hands and doing the things they need to do to stay safe. And so all of a sudden this, and also, by the way, there was so much condemnation of the protesters who had guns and invaded the Michigan State House and so on, basically saying they were super spreaders, and now there's no talk of that at all. I mean, the virus, as far as I know, does not distinguish between a liberal and a conservative.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So none of us want this to happen. All of us are hoping against it. But what would it do to the economy? We've got over 40 million people unemployed right now. What would it do to the economy if we all had to go back indoors again? If we had to really clamp it all down again?
It would be a social and economic disaster. An economic disaster because it would just exacerbate the need to keep the economy locked down and the need for the Federal Reserve to keep pumping money, to keep companies alive. But it would be a social disaster too because people are fed up and they're tired of it. And I don't know that there would be the same level of obedience, if that's the right word, that there was, back in March.
What do you make of the fact that there seems to be a fair range among the different states? We're really having the laboratory of ideas here across our federal system at the moment. Different states are taking very different approaches.
It's really hard to know what to think about that. So let me just say, if you look at Florida, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, the number of deaths are very, very low, considering the size of those states.
Joe, are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Considering the size of the states, the deaths are low. Yep.
Yeah, the deaths are really low, and you have to wonder, is it because they did something right and other people did something wrong? I mean, one thing Florida did is they did a really good job of quarantining the nursing homes, and that kept down a lot of deaths. But it also could be the weather. It could be, who knows? We just don't know. So, do I think different states should act differently given what their situation is? I absolutely do. New York should not act the same way as Texas, not just because of the political values, but because you can see the number of deaths and hospitalizations are drastically different.
So those of us who live in New York listen to Governor Cuomo and also Governor Murphy over in New Jersey, and every day they say we cannot let it go yet. We have to be careful. You got to have social distancing. And yet we don't hear that same message from the President of the United States. Could he be helping in this situation beyond the Oval Office address everybody wants him to give with respect to the riots?
He could be a leader. It is a true shame that he is not wearing a mask, that he's not leading by example, that he's not urging people to do the right thing. This idea that you're a wimp if you wear a mask, I mean, that's just totally counterproductive and destructive. And then, of course, he's, as they say, pouring gasoline on the fire with the protests as well. So, I mean, he has not been a force for good here.
What are the political consequences of all this, do you think?
Boy, I don't know. I spend way too much time on Twitter, as many people do. And I see as many smart people saying this is going to help Trump because it'll move people to the right and they'll want law and order, just as happened in 1968. And I hear just as many people say the opposite, that Trump's attitude and his inability to do anything about any of this will really hurt him. So, I am not a political prognosticator generally, and in this particular case, I'm unusually confused even by my standards.
And Antifa has done him a favor in some respects, hasn't it?
Yes, the rioting is repulsive. I mean, yes.
And it's given him a bogeyman.
There's a huge difference between protesting and rioting. And I don't know that there even is such a thing as Antifa, but be that as it may, the people who are rioting are hurting everybody. You heard those speeches in Atlanta, that you're harming your own community, and it's 100% true.
It's tragic. And many of the people who were the worst victims of the pandemic are getting hurt the hardest, which is so often the case, isn't it, as a practical matter?
Yeah, yes, it is.
The most vulnerable. Okay, Joe, it's always a great privilege to have you on. That is Joe Nocera from Bloomberg Opinion. You can read more on this and other stories from Bloomberg Opinion at Bloomberg.com/opinion and on the terminal by typing in OPIN-GO. Coming up here, President Trump's ongoing battle with social media. The editor of the Tech Dirt blog, Mike Masnick, is here to take us through the law and the business. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. U.S. stocks are posting modest gains as investors focus on signs of an economic recovery. All of the protests and demonstrations have shares in gun makers climbing today. Also on the rise, companies that make body cameras and home security systems. But the national unrest is resulting in businesses that recently reopened amid COVID-19, reclosing amid fear of destruction. CVS, Target, and Walmart have all temporarily closed certain locations, and Amazon has scaled back deliveries and adjusted routes in some cities. Apple shares are rising today. Evercore analysts think the company could be worth $2 trillion over the next 4 years. On Wall Street, the Dow is up 71 points, NASDAQ up 57, S&P up 10. Donna Wilson, Bloomberg Radio.
Imagine being fired because of who you love. Imagine being denied medical treatment because of who you marry. Imagine being evicted because of who you are. Millions of Americans don't have to imagine this. They have to live it. Because in 31 states, it's legal to discriminate against LGBT people. Get the facts at beyondido.org. Brought to you by the Gill Foundation and the Ad Council.
Are you interested in a challenging and exciting career? One where you can be part of solving complex challenges across industries and geographies? Bloomberg's ever-expanding technology, data, news, and media services foster innovation, empower clients, and offer nearly limitless opportunities for career growth. Visit Bloomberg.com/careers today to view our current job opportunities. Bloomberg LP is an equal opportunity employer. The address once again is Bloomberg.com/careers. At Bloomberg, we know a lot of financial experts.
This is a message from the government about the emergency measures to support the economy during the period of disruption caused by the coronavirus. To help you, your business, and your workers affected, you can apply for cash grants, business rate holidays, statutory sick pay relief packages, as well as the coronavirus job retention and self-employment income support schemes. For information, go to gov.uk/business-support now.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care. About each other. About our planet. About creating a better world for everyone. And becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Make sure to accept your offer by the UCAS deadline and visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
At Asda, we've provided 3,500 care homes with priority access to delivery slots, and priority shopping hours are open to our care workers. We're also donating 250,000 face masks to care homes. Asda, we're all in this together. Please show ID for priority shopping. Check asda.com for times.
The force is strong in my family. My father has it. I have it. You have that power too.
For the first time ever, stream the complete Skywalker saga, all in one place. 9 incredible films, one epic story, only on Disney+.
The Force will be with you, always.
The Skywalker Saga on Disney+. Now streaming. 18+ subscription required. T's and C's apply.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Where do sports, culture, and basketball nostalgia collide? On their podcast, Knuckleheads, NBA veterans Quentin Richardson and Darius Miles sit down with athletes, musicians, and entertainers to get brutally honest, totally unguarded conversations about everything from current events to untold stories from the golden era of sports.
Shaquille O'Neal. You know that, right? I tried to tip dunk off the free throw line one time.
Search Knuckleheads on TuneIn to listen.
Who says you can't have a laugh while getting serious about America's pastime? On the daily podcast Locked On MLB, comedian and baseball fanatic Paul Francis Sullivan talks about each team, each pennant race, and everything else in the game. from rule changes and controversies to baseball cards and stadium food.
For those of you who are not familiar with me or the old show, I love to obsess over baseball. I'm talking baseball over the Super Bowl. We had a TV showing the division series during my wedding.
Search Locked On MLB on TuneIn to listen today.
Trey Wingo here from ESPN's Golic and Wingo. Every morning, Mike Golic Jr. and I sit down to discuss all the news, drama, and highlights spinning the sports world that day. And with TuneIn, you can hear us whenever and wherever you go. Just search Golic and Wingo and start listening today.
The NHL is always on the ice with these awesome hockey podcasts on TuneIn. Get your goal with the Spittin' Chicklets podcast.
Brian Yandel, Keith Yandel, thanks for coming on. What's going on?
Nothing much. Glad to be here. You guys got some nice digs here.
We heard you took Southwest 2-stop flight to get out here.
Yeah, well, just
carve up the ice with NHL at the rink.
The other day, I wrote a story. Artemi Panarin, Semyon Varlamov, Sergei Bobrovsky, they all helped arrange for the purchase of N95 masks to benefit hospitals in their respective markets. This is another one of those positive stories you're seeing.
Or create your own power play with Locked On NHL.
All these teams invested future assets to take a run at the Stanley Cup right now. Like, all of those teams would have a real serious gripe, like trading these multiple first-round picks to make a run at a cup. You're right.
Discover these and more NHL podcasts right here on TuneIn.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Balance of Power with David Weston.
Coming up on Balance of Power, President Trump's love-hate relationship with Twitter. TechDirt's Mike Masnick is here to talk about what comes next. But first, let's get a market check with Charlie Pellet.
And I thank you very much, David Weston. Here's what's going on. The Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ at or near the best level of the day right now. Stocks are pushing higher as investors focus on signs of economic recovery amid further tension with China, lackluster virus drug test results, and the threat of further civil unrest in the United States. Here's where we stand. Right now, the S&P 500 index is up 15, a gain of 0.5%. The Dow's up 98, higher by 0.4%. NASDAQ is up 76. That is a gain of 0.8%. We've got the 10-year down 430 seconds. The yield now 0.66%. Gold up $7 the ounce at $17.37. That's a gain of 0.4%. Crude oil is down 0.5% now at $35.32 a barrel. Wall Street, meanwhile, looking ahead to Friday's jobs report. Ethan Harris is head of economic research at Bank of America Securities.
The unemployment rate, we think this week hits 19%. That is obviously partly temporary due to the shutdowns, and that data is already a couple weeks old. So we're going to see the unemployment rate come back down again, but where's it going to come down to? It's going to probably be above 10% at year end, which is where we were at the worst of the 2008-2009 recession.
Crude oil is lower now by 0.5%. West Texas Intermediate crude $35.34 a barrel. Gold up 0.4%, $17.37 the ounce. Again, recapping equities higher. Best level of the day for the Dow now up 101, up 0.4%. S&P up 16, up 0.5. NASDAQ up 79, up by 0.8%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That, David Weston, is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Appreciate it. President Trump has been communicating about the ongoing protests around the country largely through Twitter, even as he presses forward with plans to punish the social media platform by cutting back on its immunity from lawsuits. But can he have the platform he loves without the protections he wants to do away with? We welcome now Mike Masnick. He is founder and CEO of Floor 64 and editor of the Tech Dirt blog. So thanks so much for being with us, Mike. Let's start with this this Twitter dust-up. We'll move on to Facebook. But when it comes to Twitter, is it realistic for the president to get the kind of modification of his, I guess, Section 230, right, of the Communications Decency Act of 1996?
He wants to change it, but you can't change that by executive order. And so he's trying to make changes as best as he can, but the executive order is pretty limited in its power to do so.
Could he influence in any way Mr. Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, to sort of back off a little bit? Because Mr. Dorsey, well, I shouldn't say him personally, but Twitter has been posting additional links, saying you might want to look at these other links. It also took the one tweet about the Minneapolis situation, said, we normally wouldn't post it, but so we're going to warn you that this encourages violence. Is it possible that he could influence the referee, as it were?
Yeah, and that's very much what this is about. It's very much trying to, as they say, work the reps, which is, push for these companies to do less moderation or less fact-checking in order to allow him to say what he wants without additional context or without commentary from others that, push back on the president's claims.
Well, if social media firms such as Twitter, such as Facebook, did not have this protection in the statute against being sued for things that get posted, would we have the robust social media presence that we do today?
Definitely not. I mean, the Section 230 is really what made the modern internet. It's what allowed the president to be able to be on, platforms like Twitter and to say what he wants, because of the structure of the law is really designed as a protection for free speech. It's what has enabled all different websites to host whatever free speech they want without the sites being at risk of being sued for the speech of the people on those platforms. So it's really what has enabled the internet to work the way, we all expect it to work today.
But does it really push social media in the direction of essentially, let me say, laissez-faire, or let the buyer beware sort of approach? Because right now you have Twitter, where, as I say, Dorsey's Twitter is at least exercising some editorial judgment about what's getting posted. You've got Mark Zuckerberg, on the other hand, at Facebook saying, no, we're not going to do anything at all. And he's got some fairly senior employees really publicly disagreeing with him.
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting situation. It's one of the things about 230 that I think confuses a lot of people is that it allows for experimentation. It allows for different platforms to take different approaches because of the structure of the law itself. It does allow sort of a hands-off approach, but it also encourages a hands-on approach. And there's a second part of the law that basically says you're not liable for the hands-on approach to moderation. In fact, it encourages that. And so, it's part of the reason why we have all these different platforms and the different approaches that each of them take, whether you're talking about Twitter or Facebook or lots of other platforms like Wikipedia and Reddit, that all take very different approaches to how they moderate content. And it's because of the structure of the law as it is that allows that.
Now, President Trump and some other Republicans, conservative Republicans, I must say, are not doing this just because they don't like the judgments being made. They have an argument, they believe, that there is a decided bias that what is good for the goose is not good for the gander, that basically social media is being pretty tough on conservatives and very loose with liberals. If that's true, what's the recourse?
So there are a few things. One, I don't think there's any evidence that is true. I know it's a common belief, and the story has gone around. There hasn't been very much evidence to support that. In fact, there's a recent study that shows the opposite is true, at least on Facebook. But in terms of recourse, the recourse is free speech, right? That they can respond in other ways or on other platforms, or they can set up their own platforms. The nature of the internet, again, is that it is very, very effective and easy to set up new services or new platforms and new ways to speak. And if you don't like what someone is saying, then you can speak about it elsewhere.
How has social media, this is a big question now, really transformed our political discourse in this country? I mean, and President Trump would be exhibit number one, right? He loves to go directly to people instantaneously, morning, noon, and night, and be able to express his views. How has that really transformed without any moderator at all in the political discourse?
Yeah, it's really changed things. It's exactly the way that you described it, in that you've taken out the kind of gatekeeper function that has existed historically. And so it allows people to go direct, and that has some really good consequences and potentially some really bad consequences. And, part of what is happening right now, I think, is that everyone, the entire world, all of society is trying to, catch up to this change in the way that people communicate and the way powerful people and less powerful people can communicate and can spread and expand on ideas. And some of them are good and some of them are bad. And we as society kind of have to learn to deal with that and understand how, information spreads in a very different way than before, when it all went, solely through large gatekeepers.
Well, in the olden days, the broadcast news and the FCC and fairness doctors and things, most people essentially delegated to a relatively handful of major news organizations the job of figuring out what's true and what's false. And maybe they did a good job of that, maybe they did a bad job, but at least they delegated that and said, I don't have the time to sort it out. Are we asking too much of people to say each one of you has to be your own editor?
Whether or not we're asking too much, it's happening. It's kind of the situation. And so, as much as we could say maybe it was nice when you had people who were in charge of making those decisions, there were some bad things about that. Certain information never got covered. And I think some of the protests that are going on around the world today are in part because there was a lot of information that wasn't being seen and wasn't being reported on. And that's changed in part because of social media. And so the enabling factor of it that gets past the gatekeepers and gets past that function has some power. There are risks, and that power can be abused, and that's also some of what we've seen. But, understanding those things, and as society, we have to figure it out, and that is, the important thing. Whether or not it's good or bad is kind of beside the point. What we do with it next is what's important.
Is this fundamentally different in degree or in kind from what we had when we had broadcasting, first radio and then television? Because then you had the ability of various people, and it was used by some pretty unscrupulous people around the world to reach mass audiences quickly. It's faster now, it's a bigger audience, but is it sort of the same?
There are some similarities and plenty of differences, and the fact that you can do very different things and that you don't have to always go through some sort of gatekeeper, and that there is the ability to respond to people who say things that you disagree with. There is the ability to put out different points of view, I think is very powerful and changes it very much from the way things used to be.
Yeah, fascinating, very powerful things. Thank you so much to Mike Masnick of Tector. That was great to have you with us. Coming up, we talk with Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence of Michigan about the weekend of civil unrest, including a riot just last night in Detroit, and what Congress might be able to do about it. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio.
Hey, y'all, Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
25 years ago, NJIT graduate Dick Sweeney co-founded Keurig Green Mountain, a company whose incredible innovations changed the way the world brews a cup of coffee. Today, he lectures widely on business leadership and is a strong advocate for NJIT's work to combine business education with the power of STEM.
NJIT is definitely fostering the innovative thinking for budding entrepreneurs simply because that's the world we live in. NJIT is producing students that have been trained, educated, and given the business acumen to be a contributor to a company. The distinct mission is to develop great STEM scholars. The attributes I've always looked for in team members are heart, smarts, guts, and luck. So we want people with passion, intelligence, courage, and never discount luck. The student coming out of NJIT has experienced all of that.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
This Independence Day,
when family video calls are too good to miss, your virtual quiz team is demanding a rematch, and one more episode just isn't enough. You need loads of data. Get a massive 30 gig for £10 a month from Smarty Mobile. With no speed restrictions, unlimited calls and texts, and a flexible 1-month plan, it's no wonder you Switch awarded Smarty Best Value SIM-Only Network 2020. Search Smarty. Simple, honest mobile. See smarty.co.uk.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care. About each other. About our planet. About creating a better world for everyone. And becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Make sure to accept your offer by the UCAS deadline and visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
This is a message from the government about the emergency measures to support the economy during the period of disruption caused by the coronavirus. To help you, your business, and your workers affected, you can apply for cash grants, business rate holidays, statutory sick pay relief packages, as well as the coronavirus job retention and self-employment income support schemes. For information, go to gov.uk/business-support now.
At Asda, we're helping you shop safely by keeping our stores clean and limiting customer numbers so you can keep 2 meters apart. With our Scan and Go mobile app, you can reduce contact at the till too. Asda, we're all in this together. Subject to availability. Mobile data charges may apply.
Whoa, just got a Moonpig reminder that it's your birthday Saturday.
Yeah, I set that up.
Oh, do you know what? I forget one time. Okay, I'm in the app.
Oh, the romantic card section.
I'm full of surprises. Now, what rhymes with babe?
How about just uploading a nice pic? No, wait, I'm not ready.
Hey, I love you from every angle. Now for the gifts. Oh, and flowers.
Heartfelt can happen anywhere with moonpig.com. Download the app now.
The Woj Pod with Adrian Wojnarowski.
Doris, you had reason to believe that you needed to get a test for the coronavirus.
Right. Well, let's just start with the headline, which is I did test positive for COVID-19. I was so tired from Saturday the 14th through Tuesday, March 17th. I kid you not, I could not be out of bed for 5 minutes without needing to go back to bed and lay down.
Search the Woj Pod to listen.
Ready for some straight talk on what's happening in the MLB? On the Barstool Sports Podcast starting 9, Dallas Braden and Jared Carrabis cut through the BS to break down the league the way they really see it.
Yeah, we're continuing our little mini-series of college baseball coaches in addition to bringing you major league players from throughout the league. If you've been listening to Starting 9 for some time now, you know that we've had a big leaguer on every single episode for probably 2 years now.
Search Starting 9 on TuneIn to listen.
It's headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. The Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing a Monday rally at or near the best level of the day right now. Stocks are higher. Investors are focusing on signs of economic recovery amid further tension with China, along with lackluster virus drug results and the threat of further civil unrest in America. Right now, the S&P is up 17, up 0.6%. The Dow at 25,501, now up 118 points, a gain of 0.5%. And NASDAQ is up 77, that is a gain of 0.8%. 10-year down 5/30 seconds with a yield of 0.66%. Gold is up 0.4%, $17.37 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.7%, $35.27 a barrel. Recapping stocks higher across the board here. S&P up 17, up 0.6%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Balance of power continues. And once again, here's your host, David Weston.
Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. Detroit had a third night of protests last night, despite a curfew set for 8 p.m., and it led to use of tear gas and to arrests. We welcome now Representative Brenda Lawrence, Democrat of Michigan. Congresswoman Lawrence earlier served as mayor of Southfield, just outside of Detroit. So, Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us. Give us a status report right now. How is Detroit doing?
Detroit is doing well. I'm proud of the protesters across this country who have come out to say that this injustice will not be tolerated. And it's people of all ethnicities. It's young people, and it gives me hope because the next generation is speaking now and saying in our country this will not happen. Unfortunately, we have had these agitators that have no interest in promoting freedom or justice, but they're just here to destroy. And so far, the city of Detroit has stood strong with not having any destruction to property, and we're so proud of that because we went through the riots in the 60s that tore up Detroit, and I think that's still in our mind. And while we're protesting, we are seeing people coming in from different areas, but the city of Detroit is doing well. And I'm at a rally now where we're gathering to lift our voices and to assemble to talk about we want justice. We want those other officers arrested so that they could be held accountable for what they participated in.
So given your knowledge of Detroit, the area, Southfield, and your experience, how can we get rid of those agitators on one hand, and at the same time, let's be honest, get rid of some of the police that should not have been police? I think it's fair to say at this point. We can see.
Well, the one thing is that the way, because the officer who was arrested for this crime had multiple disciplinary charges against him, and it was just passed over, it appears. How can you have that many and there's no red flags? And anyone who performs like that, and, you know, it has to go on the record that President Obama started the 21st Century Commission on Reforming Policing in America. And this president, Donald Trump, eliminated it and got rid of it. We have to be committed to ongoing fight and standing up against policies that reflect in this type of behavior. And we're seeing it played out in the police department. We see the unfortunate thing where a white woman can call in and say, a black man, I'm scared because there's a black man here. It's those codes that says, okay, it's a black man. He's got to be a criminal. She's got to be in danger. So we need to just be aggressive in taking him out.
It may be a coincidence, or it may not, that this comes sort of on the heels of a pandemic that hit Michigan, and particularly Detroit, southeast Michigan, particularly hard. Detroit's majority African-American, as I understand it, African-Americans and Hispanics have disproportionately been hit by this disease. Does that exacerbate the situation, or does it put a spotlight on some of the underlying conditions that need to be addressed?
So I want everyone to understand what we're seeing happening in America is not limited to Mr. Floyd's death. It is the trigger. People, like you say, in the disproportionate effect of this disease on African Americans has been extremely hard on our community. The multiple deaths, the fear, it's like, why are we, because of health disparities, dying at a higher rate? Then you add onto that unemployment. The city of Detroit had just started coming back. We were building, people were working, and then the pandemic hit. So we're back to issues, and Detroit has one of the highest levels of poverty in the country. So you add all these things together, and it's like you have to, that saying, I can't breathe. It's so much frustration. It's so much, no one hears me. No one's looking out for me. So it's more than just this horrific murder of Mr. Floyd. It's more than that. And that's what I want everyone to hear. And people who are compassionate and care, they call me of all races and say, Brenda, what's going on? What do we need to do? We all need to accept the fact that in America, racism is alive and well. And we need to lock arms and say, we're not going to allow this to continue to happen.
And then the question is, what do you do? I mean, I was in high school not far from Detroit when the riots happened in the late 60s. I remember seeing the smoke on the horizon there. I don't think that Detroit came out of that stronger or better over the next generation. There were not the fundamental systemic changes made, I don't believe, to put things on the right track. How can we do it better this time to say this is an opportunity to really think through the systemic changes that need to be made?
There's two things that I always say. If you want to make life better for African Americans, it is education and it's employment. And the educational piece, there is a substandard of education in most urban minority majority cities. So when you see large populations of minorities, the school system is not performing equal to school systems, and black people are not ignorant. Black people are not incapable of learning. But when you look at the books, the environment, when you look at the resources, and you have to, someone just told me, well, what do you say to someone like me? I'm colorblind. I don't see race. And so when you talk about this, I don't know, I have a hard time understanding it. I said, but my question to you, first of all, thank you if you're colorblind and you see everyone as equal. But God bless you. I question, are you tone deaf or are you blind that in America we do not have a colorblind society, that African Americans are not treated equally? Why are we the largest proportion of people being in prison? Why are we leading in unemployment? Why are we leading in poverty? Why do we have these large health disparities? No one chose this. If you don't educate a child, they don't have options. And it seems almost like it's a systematic process of putting roadblocks up. So I can stand here and say, as a member, as an African American, we can overcome this.
Right. A lot of work left to be done. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your being with us. That's Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence of Michigan. And that does it for Balance of Power for today. I'm David Weston, and this is Bloomberg.
At the start of every...
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
This is Mike Golic Jr. from ESPN's Golic and Wingo. Every morning, Wingo, Dad, and I sit down and discuss all the news, drama, and highlights spinning the sports world that day. And with TuneIn, you can hear us whenever and wherever you go. Just search Golic and Wingo to start listening today.
Looking to freshen up your listening on TuneIn? Head to the homepage to discover something new. There you'll see custom recommendations based on your listening habits, along with new episodes of shows you've enjoyed in the past. Uncover your next audio obsession on the homepage.
Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
Yeah, but it's unique times. I think there's unique circumstances, and we're trying to
standout stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
Looking for your daily fix of NFL news and analysis?
In that. So we had to blow it up into Super Bowl predictions instead.
Look no further than the Pick 6 podcast, where CBS sports writer Will Brinson gets you up to speed with what's trending in the NFL that day, so that you're always in the know.
Yeah, it's pretty revealing of Brinson's methodology for predictions. When he gets mad at people for predicting good teams are going to win the Super Bowl or good players are going to win major awards, that's how you wind up.
Search Pick 6 on TuneIn to listen. Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with a podcast on TuneIn. For expert analysis straight from the WWE to Steve Austin's no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Where do sports, culture, and basketball nostalgia collide? On their podcast, Knuckleheads, NBA veterans Quentin Richardson and Darius Miles sit down with athletes, musicians, and entertainers to get brutally honest, totally unguarded conversations about everything from current events to untold stories from the golden era of sports.
Kill O'Neal. You know that, right? I tried to tip dunk all the free throw line one time.
Search Knuckleheads on TuneIn to listen.
24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Mazur and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
Live from New York and New Jersey, streaming on YouTube, it is Monday, June 1st, 2020, and safe to say, a somber day and weekend, a nation in crisis, and no, as you might guess, it is not about the virus. Of course, the death of George Floyd and subsequent protests and rising civil unrest around the nation, reminding us once again of the inequalities that exist in our society. And Jason, we're going to look at that through our Bloomberg lens over the next few hours.
Well, and we've all been riveted by the pictures from around the country, some in our backyard in many cases, and we know that it has affected individuals, we know it has affected companies, and we know it has ultimately an economic effect. And we also know that this is part of an underlying economic crisis that this country is facing and has been facing for some time. A lot of things coming together here. We are going to explore all of them with a whole host of experts from different walks of life. So looking forward to an interesting few hours as we keep an eye on a market that has largely shrugged a lot of this off. Let's get some of those numbers from Charlie Pellet. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much. Happy Monday to you both. Indeed, markets looking past a lot of what you're talking about. S&P up by 14 now at 3,058, a gain of 0.5%. The Dow's up 83. That is a gain of 0.3%. NASDAQ on this back to work Monday, up 70 points, higher by 0.7%. The 10-year down 5/30 seconds with a yield of 0.66%. We've got gold up 0.4, 17.37 the ounce, and crude West Texas Intermediate down 1.2%, 35.08 a barrel. Again, recapping, equities higher now, close to the best level with the S&P up 14, up 0.5%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, we'll obviously be keeping an eye on that trade amid everything else. And speaking of which, let's set the Business Week agenda because the markets remain front and center, we know, for our audience, and also as a gauge of where we are, both economically and what the reaction is to all of this that's going on around us. To help us do that, Gina Martin-Adams is, of course, Bloomberg Intelligence Chief Equity Strategist, and Dave Wilson, Bloomberg's Stocks Editor. They both join us from New Jersey. Dave, I want to start with you. Just give us the sense, as you look at the contours of this trade, what's driving us up here?
Well, it really looks, Jason, like a lot of the shares that have been beaten down over the past few months are kind of leading the way up here. I mean, you've got a perfect example in Coty. I mean, given that they've made a deal with KKR for their professional beauty business. We're talking about Clairol and Wella, those brands valued in the transaction of $4.3 billion. And Coty's shares are up almost 17%. It's the biggest gain in the S&P 500. And then you see the gap after that. I mean, talk about a stock that's been beaten up lately. You know, J.P. Morgan getting more positive on the company given the extent of the stock's decline, and it's up more than 12%. You know, you go down the list, you see some of the retailers, companies, real estate investment trusts that actually own the shopping centers.
Right.
You know, you see, the cruise lines, the airlines to some extent, the hotels. I mean, those are the kind of stocks that are leading the way, as much as anything. I mean, tech shares aren't even keeping up with the S&P 500 at the moment.
Yeah. Gina, come on in on this. It's an interesting, I think we all thought, that because of some of the turmoil that we saw around the nation over the weekend, also China and U.S. tensions seem to be taking another step forward, China kind of kicking back here or pushing back. I think we thought that there'd be a little bit more nervousness in the markets. How do you see it today?
Well, what I see is a market that continues to broaden. It's a continuation of leadership into, as Dave mentioned, the beaten down names. That's really been going on since late March, and it's just continued to gather steam. Throughout the month of May, we saw this gather steam significantly. But a couple of really critical technical thresholds were reached last week that are just too tough for investors to continue to ignore. I mean, I think the first 2 months of this rally were was a lot about, kind of taking a leap of faith, and there were still a lot of investors sitting on the sidelines sort of poo-pooing the rally as a bear market rally that'll eventually fade and turn over. But last week, we crossed over the 200-day moving average for the first time. We got to the point where 90% of stocks in the index were trading above their 50-day moving average. These types of numbers just don't happen in bear market bounces. They usually signify the beginnings of a new uptrend and a recovery rally that tends to endure. So I think what you're seeing both last week and a continuation of today is really investors finally capitulating to the trend, rotating into where they see you have the greatest opportunity for continued advance, which many would say are the cyclical laggards, where you probably still have a little bit of room for catch-up, and generally starting to put a little bit of money to work in equities, despite the fact that they're kicking and screaming their way in.
Well, it's interesting, also kicking and screaming their way in is Goldman Sachs, which rolled back its pessimistic outlook for stocks, right? David Costin was predicting the S&P would slump to the 2,400 level, so that was, 20% below the Friday close, and now they're saying, okay, yeah, we're going to, go all in like everybody else.
Yeah, these kind of things always worry me. When everybody starts to capitulate, then you want to start to get a little bit more cautious. And that is something that we're starting to do, actually. We put a report on the terminal this morning talking about, while we're very, very sort of soothed by the idea that finally we get to claim that this is a recovery rally with the technicals that have formed, we also typically find that market advance is slow following those technical measures reached. So our view is that we head into a choppier market over the summer. We start to really question our economic outlook. We've seen a lot of re-rating on policy and optimism that, policy will sort of swoop in and provide enough cover for us to get through this. Now I think we get into more of a show-me market, and we start to see, really focus on that economic and earnings data a little bit more for signs of recovery emerging.
Yeah, those next earnings reports are going to be fascinating to look at. All right, Gina Martin-Adams, thank you so much. Bloomberg Intelligence Chief Equity Strategist Dave Wilson, before you go, give us a preview of the chart.
Well, if you think we were in a bear market for just 5 weeks in U.S. stocks, you look beyond the S&P 500 and you see an indication that it went on much longer and cut much deeper than just looking at that one index would suggest.
Interesting. All right. That's coming up at 3:30 Wall Street time. Dave Wilson, our stocks editor. All right. Well, coming up, as we alluded to at the top of the show, Carol, we are going to look at what's going on right now through all our Bloomberg lenses. And we've got experts from across the board, whether it's sports or business, entertainment, so many different elements here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to be talking with John Hope Bryant, CEO of Operation Hope, PwC Chair Tim Ryan. He's been talking with a lot of CEOs, so we'll see what he has to say. He's been talking to them, obviously, about the impact of the virus, but, what's happened over the last week in Minneapolis has certainly brought a lot of concern and, stress among corporations and certainly for their employees. So we'll talk to him about that. And then Candace Lee, she's the first African-American woman to lead an SEC athletic department. She's just been named the first female athletic director at Vanderbilt. So totally interested in talking to her about her tenure. She was an athlete. She's been very involved at Vanderbilt in terms of their sports programs, but now she's in charge of it all. So on this day when we're talking so much about, of course, Minneapolis, inequalities, George Floyd, I'm curious to see what she has to say about that as well.
Absolutely. Looking forward to that. We're also going to get into the business of live music later on. And also, we can't forget, and you alluded to this with Gina, some of the big stories. China obviously continues to dominate headlines. We're going to get into that as well. And let's not forget, we're in a global health crisis, folks. And we're going to catch up with this CEO of Providence Health out on the West Coast. In the meantime, let's do the Bloomberg Business Week Bite of the Day. It's one number that tells us a lot. Today's number is $2 trillion, Carol.
It is indeed, Jason. Apple is on track for a market capitalization of $2 trillion over the next 4 years. This is according to analysts over at Evercore ISI. They see a combination of earnings growth and a boost from the services and wearable businesses, helping Apple become the first company of that value. It's just kind of mind-blowing. Evercore's analyst sees Apple shares reaching $550 in an upside scenario driven by gross margin expansion. The market cap currently, Jason, around $1.4 trillion, just below Microsoft's, which is at 1.39. Apple's at 1.38, let's be exact. And Amazon right now at 1.12. $22 trillion. I mean, it's just a different era when it comes to market caps.
Yeah, that's trillion with a T.
Yeah.
People, that's amazing. All right, let's get to Mark Mills now. He's got some world and national headlines. Hey, Mark.
Jason Carroll, thanks. President Donald Trump urged states to crack down on nationwide protests in the aftermath of the death of a black man at the hands of police in Minneapolis. You have to dominate, Trump said Monday in a video conference with governors and law enforcement. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. They're going to run over you, and you're going to look like a bunch of jerks. You have to dominate, and you have to arrest people, and you have to try people, said Trump. Bloomberg News obtained an audio recording of Trump's comments. Black pastors and politicians challenged Joe Biden on Monday to outline what he would do as president to improve access to economic opportunity and overhaul the criminal justice system as violent protests sweep the country. The American astronauts aboard the International Space Station held a news conference before beginning their scientific assignments. Bloomberg's Irv Chapman reports from Washington.
Astronaut Chris Cassidy, who's been on the space station since early April, described the arrival of his two colleagues.
They're going 17,500 miles an hour, and we're going 17,500 miles an hour. And we are bringing these two vehicles together with a computer and them backing it up, and I could monitor this process on the telemetry. I was pretty amazed at the whole thing.
Astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley said their first chore was to check out the capsule that brought them, that would eventually bring them home, and would be their emergency escape vehicle if needed. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Mark Mills. Carol and Jason, back to you.
All right, Mark, thank you so much. Well, as we know, we talked a little bit about so much going on, certainly on this Monday, but we cannot forget that we are still in a global pandemic, global deaths exceeding 372,000. Lots going on. So let's get an update. Let's head back to one of our, top voices when it comes to what's going on in the virus. That's Dr. Rod Hochman. He's president and CEO of Providence Health. Of course, we've talked to them before, and him specifically, the massive health system that's out there on the West Coast. Dr. Hochman joining us on the phone once again from Seattle, Washington. Dr. Hochman, nice to have you back with us. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing at this point and what it tells you about kind of where we are as a country when it comes to the virus, getting control of the virus, and maybe what it helps tell us about what the next few months look like.
Sure. I think as all physicians and all people in healthcare, besides the tragic events of the weekend and all of that, we're holding our breath, watching all of these people in close quarters, thinking about what's going to happen 2 weeks from now. And, because we look at it from a clinical standpoint as well as from an emotional standpoint, we understand, but wow. We just see with a lot of the opening up of the country, but then particularly with all the demonstrations across the country, what's going to happen in terms of the spread of this virus. So that's, I think, collectively we're holding our breath on that one. We were comfortable with where we saw things going. I think now it's kind of a wait and watch where the next few weeks come.
And so, Dr. Hochman, when you've joined us before, it's clear that you are in touch with state officials at the highest level. You're talking to CEOs and others. I believe you were in consultation with the Business Roundtable and other corporate groups. Help us understand what folks at that level are talking about now, especially as we think about reopening in a very cautious way across the country.
So I think there are two things. One is we're giving out a lot of advice on what's the best way to do it. And I have to say, from the business standpoint, a lot of the CEOs and companies are doing a great job thinking through how they get their workers back, what's the best thing to do. They're getting a lot of great medical input. So I was really pleased just to see the way they're responding. And then the second is specifically with a lot of the pharma CEOs talking about vaccine development. And the thing that I've been worrying about most is not as much about the vaccine development, but are we going to have the delivery mechanisms for those vaccines, enough glass vials, enough needles? And then what's the priority by which we start vaccinating 300 plus million Americans? Who do we start with? How do we do that? Those are all the preparations that we need to do now for 6 months from now. And I was glad to see at least the business community, and I was just talking to the CEO of a major pharmaceutical company. He said, look, we just spent the last 3 hours on that topic. So I was pleased to hear that.
Do we need federal government involvement in order to do it the way that it needs to be done so that we are ready in 6 months, perhaps, when a vaccine is there?
Yeah, I think the CEOs have gone beyond that and are just saying, okay, how do we get this done? I think we need to have coordination between the pharma companies and then each state is going to have to figure out how does it vaccinate its population. And one of the things that we have is that we do the influenza vaccine every year. Might that not be a good starting place to figure out how do we distribute the vaccine and everything else? So I think what's happened, I think in this next phase, people are just moving beyond.
And so, Dr. Hochman, just staying with vaccines for a moment, as you're talking to these CEOs and other folks within the medical community, and I know you're talking to researchers and whatnot, what's the realistic timetable? I mean, is 6 months still realistic in terms of getting something that is, if not sort of mass available to the extent that it really makes a dent in how we can live our lives?
Right. So I think there are two aspects to this. One is, kind of the ethical one where a number of people have agreed to get actually infected with COVID if they've gotten on the vaccine to accelerate the process to look at the efficacy. Because ultimately, if you have to wait for, the natural progression of the disease, it takes time. So a lot of people are working through that. If that happens, that's going to really accelerate the development of understanding whether we have an efficacious vaccine. So that's going to be a big, big step there. But it's really exciting, the amount of research that's being done, and more than likely, we'll have more than one vaccine. It's going to be several different ones that we're going to be looking at.
If I can switch gears just for a second, Dr. Hochman, I think all of us, there was a story, several stories that have come out, and I know Bloomberg News has covered as well, about, the amount of bailout money that went to different hospital systems. And I think you folks got about $500 million. Help us understand, because you're one of the more one of the largest systems in the country and one of the more, I guess, financially solvent hospital systems. Help us understand how that makes sense.
So, okay, I'm so glad you asked that question. I think I need to teach the New York Times about numerator and denominator. we have 51 hospitals. We have 120,000 people, and we're in 7 states. So obviously, when you break that down hospital and hospital by clinic, it's actually a smaller amount than has happened in other places. Secondly, we reminded them that they didn't want to print it, that we do about $1.5 billion of free care each year in community service. And then the third is on an EBITDA and margin basis, we're a 1% to 2% margin operation. So I wish I was a Silicon powerhouse and all the words that they used. And, I think most of us in healthcare saw how long they got the story. They were just looking at the top line numbers that were given out. And then also weren't looking, what were the areas of the country that were most affected? Obviously, we're in Los Angeles, Seattle, that were heavily affected by COVID-19. Right. So I could go on, but it's unfortunate how a lot of the stories get editorialized and aren't based on the facts.
Right. Dr. Hochman, we really appreciate your input, as always. Dr. Hochman from Providence Health. We do want to take you to D.C., where the White House press secretary is making some comments. Let's listen in.
Only 2 states have deployed more than 1,000. There are 350,000 National Guard available overall, and for the lawlessness we are seeing, far more needs to be done. Governors across the country must act, deploy the National Guard as it's fit, and protect American communities. As President Trump has said repeatedly, it's very important that we have peaceful protesters and support the right of peaceful protesters, but we cannot allow a situation like what happened in Minneapolis to descend further into lawless anarchy and chaos. And we understand that very well. And with that, I'll take questions. Yes.
To your point, the country is in crisis. There's a global pandemic that has claimed more than 100,000 lives. At least 40 million people are unemployed. There are now protests and racial tension ripping apart many cities. Where is the president? Why has he not delivered an address to the nation, as many of his predecessors have in a time of domestic crisis?
So the president has delivered multiple statements on this. The president, as recently as 48 hours ago, was out talking about what a tragedy the death of George Floyd was, how it has weighed on his heart, and how he encourages peace and lawfulness in our streets and peaceful protests. So he has said that repeatedly. He's made many statements to this effect, but what I would note is continual statements, as he's made day and day and day and day again, they don't stop anarchy. What stops anarchy is action, and that's what the president is working on right now.
To that point about the anarchists, you said this morning that the president is focused right now on rooting out Antifa. George Floyd did not die in Antifa custody. He died in police custody. What's the president doing to reform policing tactics and excessive use of force by police?
Yeah, so it's an important question for sure. And this president, if you look at the actions his DOJ has taken, there's a civil rights investigation into the death of Ahmaud Arbery. There's a civil rights investigation into the death of George Floyd. It is a tragedy what we saw. I mentioned to you that the president was extremely upset when he saw that video. And he continues to, the DOJ continues to pursue those charges. And he's recognized injustices for a long time. Since he was a candidate, he talked about Sandra Bland and what a terrible video that was too. So he recognizes injustices where they are, but at the same time, he also recognizes that we can't allow organized groups like Antifa to commit some of the heinous acts that we've seen. John.
Billy, in his call with the governors, the president said that he had put General Milley in charge of all this. What does that mean?
Yeah, so
staff in charge of policing American streets. What did he mean?
So I'm not going to get ahead of any actions that will be announced, but what I will say to you is this, that he has had two briefings today with Secretary Esper and AG Barr, and General Milley was there, and there will be additional federal assets deployed across the nation. There will be a central command center in conjunction with the state and local governments that will include General Milley, Secretary Esper, and AG Barr, but I won't go any further in announcing what actions.
Can you explain what the president meant when he told the governors, I am put General Milley in charge? What does that mean? Because that sounds like a total break here. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff being in charge of a domestic issue.
And ensuring that, as the president has said, and this has been taken out of context, by the way, that our streets are dominated with a police force and with a National Guard presence. So that, let me explain a little bit about how this works. If there's a peaceful protest, police will form a line. And what we've seen are those lines have been overwhelmed by massive protests that have turned into riots, the peaceful protests to be distinguished from the riots we've seen. And when those lines are overwhelmed, law enforcement gets on the defense. So what the president has said is he wants to dominate the streets with National Guard, with a police presence. And what studies have shown, as General Milley noted, he was in that governor's call, and his points all pertain to the National Guard. And he noted that there are several studies that when there's an overwhelming National Guard presence, it actually de-escalates the situation and causes less civil unrest. So General Milley has really been on point in talking about the National Guard, the effectiveness, and ensuring that they're utilized to great effect across the country.
What's been taken out of context? Because I have the exact quote. It's a very simple one. He just says that he has put General Milley in charge.
No, I wasn't suggesting that quote was out of context. The dominate. I've seen some networks that have talked about dominating protesters, and I've been around the president all day. Anytime he's used the word dominate, it was with regard to dominating the streets and ensuring that we have peace in our streets. Yes. Yes, thanks.
In addition to the tough talk the president has been talking about taking action against looters and some of the violent elements in the protests that we've seen, why isn't he also supplementing that message by calling on these people to remain calm, to go home, to not destroy property, businesses, so on?
Yeah, he has done that repeatedly. Look, he talked about understanding the pain that people are feeling, and he does understand that pain. He's talked several times about the right to peacefully protest, and I've seen some of these peaceful protests, some of these sit-ins, and it's a real shame when you have anarchy and anarchists come in and you have Antifa come in, and it really dilutes the message of the protesters, and it's a legitimate reason they're protesting. So he hates to see Antifa come in and really dampen that message, which has been in many cases peaceful, but has been overtaken and overwhelmed by an organized effort of people from out of state coming in and causing havoc.
Is he traveling on Friday? Is he going to Maine?
He still plans on going to Maine. I haven't heard any other changes to that effect. Yeah. We just.
Thank you.
I like your mask. That's really cool.
I have a quick follow-up about police reform. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien says he does not think there is systemic racism among law enforcement in the U.S. Does President Trump share that view?
Look, I think where the president stands is he does not believe, he fundamentally rejects the idea that these egregious actions of these 4 Minnesota officers are representative of our police force as a whole. Most of our officers in this country are good, hardworking men and women who work every day to police our streets. He's recognized cases of injustice. I noted Sandra Bland back when he was in the primary. I've noted more recently Ahmaud Arbery and then George Floyd. So he recognizes these injustices. He puts a focus on them, but he also recognizes our valiant police officers who have taken to the streets each and every night over the last 6 nights and protected our communities.
And on Antifa, can you explain what the legal authority the president has is for designating Antifa as a terrorist organization? And can you also talk about why he does not want to label white supremacist groups that are domestically located as terrorist organizations as well?
So let me address the first part about legal authority. Title 18, Section 2331 allows that the term, it defines domestic terrorism as involving acts dangerous to human life that appear intended to influence the policy of a government, and other elements are laid out, and it allows the Department of Justice, when utilizing this statute, to invoke greater investigatory authority and to invoke harsher penalties. I would note that the Justice Department has in the past used domestic terrorism in consultation with acts of white supremacy or what were racially motivated acts. Like in April 2020, a Florida man pled guilty to threatening an African-American Charlottesville City Council candidate. And at that time, the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force was utilized. Same in the case of February 2020, where it was used in connection to 4 racially motivated violent extremists. And I would also note the president's long history of condemning white supremacy and racism. There is no place in society for these egregious, despicable ideologies. Jen?
Hasn't he designated any white nationalist groups as terrorist organizations?
It has been used. I explained how in this case that domestic terrorism will be used as a way that the crime is prosecuted. It's a prosecutorial method, and it was utilized in the same exact way with regard to white supremacy. Yes.
Kaylee, on the Minnesota police officers, is he suggesting that they should be charged as well as the officer who's already been charged, the other 3? And also on Antifa, can you explain a little bit about how would he know, or how is he talking about how he would identify members of Antifa? Since they're a very loose organization, it would be very difficult to tell who is part of Antifa.
So first, I was just on the call with the president where he expressed his dismay with those 3 officers who watched. I'll leave it to the state to pursue those charges if they decide to. It was the state that pursued the initial charge, but the president has expressed his complete dismay with those actions. With Antifa, I do think it's important to note that they are a big element of this protest. AG Barr has noted that. Ambassador O'Brien has noted that. We have ample evidence that DOJ has received indicating that Antifa is responsible for that unrest. But as to exactly how Antifa is identified, that would be more of a question for DOJ. Yes.
When you talk about additional federal assets, does the president have authority to deploy forces across the country beyond the National Guard?
He does. And look, we're looking at every tool in the federal toolkit available to us. You know, ideally, this would have been resolved at the state level. The states, after all, have the police power embedded in the 10th Amendment, and it is their responsibility to patrol their streets. But you're right to say that there are many federal authorities, including the one you cited, available to us.
Did you bring this up with the governors in the phone call today?
The focus of the call with the governors was really the National Guard, not that specific tool in the toolkit that you mentioned, but the National Guard and how it should be utilized much stronger than it's currently being utilized. Yes, I will go to, let's see, Jeff.
Okay, thanks. Following up on what John was asking earlier, Governor Whitmer, she said she found the president's call today deeply disturbing, and she said the president told the governors they need to put it down or they would be overridden. So what, I mean, is there a specific authority he's using? Because as you know, Posse Comitatus really prevents the use of the army to put down domestic insurrection at any time.
Yeah, I don't know why Governor Whitmer would be dismayed at the president telling governors to do their job. It is their responsibility to police their streets. They have the police power embedded in the Constitution. They have quite clearly, many of them, failed to do their job. Look at the scenes we have seen. And it's gotten to the point where today the president has said, enough is enough. You know, there are tools I can use. namely deploying National Guard. Many others that Steve cited, one, the Insurrection Act. It's one of the tools available. Whether the president decides to pursue that, that's his prerogative. Right now, we're looking at a focus on the National Guard. That's where it currently stands. And, there's a distinction between the National Guard and military forces in the street. I would note the National Guard are the friends and neighbors in these communities who are used, and as I noted, the study from General Milley used to great effect when they are deployed. So the focus of the call was the National Guard, encouraging the deployment, far more than the 17,000 out there, and utilizing them this evening, certainly.
Would you like to see 100,000?
All right, you have been listening to a press briefing led by the press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, there at the White House. And Carol, I have to say, you and I were chatting a little bit virtually as that was going on, and, a series of questions and answers, not something that we have become used to seeing, candidly. This new press secretary certainly facing the press, giving answers in a very, sort of back and forth sort of way.
Well, even having a daily press briefing, right? Something that went away for several weeks or even longer. So getting an update on certainly...
Months and months.
It was months, actually, right.
Yeah.
So, getting used to, kind of having these back in and talking about the day's events and what the administration's policies are. And I will say one of the key things are, I think, at this point is how do the disruptions around the country, the protests, how are they controlled? And at this point, it does sound like Trump is, the president's demanding action to protect citizens, talking a lot about deploying the National Guard as they see fit, but also the White House press secretary saying that additional federal assets will be deployed, I guess, if necessary. So certainly keeping an eye on it, but in many ways, not unlike the virus, leaving it for states to handle.
Right, and she did clarify some comments that had been reported from that call that the president had with governors, saying that when he was using the word dominating, he was talking about dominating the streets rather than the protesters.
Correct.
That seems like an important point of clarification. So we're going to get more on what she had to say. We'll continue to monitor that coming up. Right now, let's get back to Charlie Pellet. He's got an update on the trading day and some business headlines. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Jason Kelly. We're higher across the board here, but investors mostly looking past the weekend of violent protests across the United States. S&P off at session highs, but up 10 now at 3,055, a gain of 0.4%. The Dow is up 51, higher by 0.2%. NASDAQ is up 61 for NASDAQ. That is a gain right now of just about 0.7%. Gilead Sciences shares, they are moving lower after its drug remdesivir showed only a limited benefit in a large trial of more moderate patients with COVID-19, a result that may shift perceptions of the therapy already cleared for use in severe cases of the disease. Gilead shares down now by 2.6%. Gun stocks, they are surging today after that weekend of protests across the country. Among some of the gun names today, Sturm Ruger is higher, pushing higher now by 9.6%. We've got Smith & Wesson up 15.8%, and Vista Outdoor, it is up now by almost 9%. Tenured on 5/30 seconds with a yield of 0.66%. Gold up 0.4%, $17.37 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude, little changed at $35.51 a barrel, up about 0.1%. And gold up 0.4%, $17.37 the ounce. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Well, let's understand more about what we've heard from the administration today and what we've just heard from the press secretary. We're going to bring in Josh Wingrove, Bloomberg News White House correspondent, joining us on the phone. All right, so Josh, break it down. What are the most important things we're hearing from the administration today?
Yeah, we sort of began the day with a question of whether or not President Trump would give some sort of address, and it doesn't look like he's going to do that. Instead, he spoke with governors for an hour, Democrats and Republicans. An audio of that call obtained by Bloomberg and by other media have said or showed that he really encouraged governors to, quote, dominate the streets. We've been talking about it, just before this. This is a message that's being repeated right now by his press secretary as her briefing is ongoing. Throughout that hour-long call, he used phrases like knock them down like bowling pins, National Guard being able to cut through protests like a knife through butter, really sort of using language that was criticized on the call by a Democratic governor of Illinois as incendiary, but saying the governor should be calling in the National Guard to take control of their streets, and saying that sort of agitators or outside agitators, Antifa as he calls them, are sort of making it worse or seizing the protests, if you will, by what the White House has said are more legitimate protesters.
So we just heard from the White House press secretary, and she got questions about this whole idea of, or what the president said on that call with governors about dominating protesters. Did she conflict what was on that call that we heard, that recording that the president had with governors, or did she just kind of add more confusion to what what exactly he meant, Josh?
I think she tried to clarify in a couple of ways where Trump left things up in the air. One was, okay, well, when you talk about cracking down or talk about wiping out, as Trump said, Occupy Wall Street, he likened it to wiping out Occupy Wall Street. Mm-hmm. Are you talking about the protests or the protesters? And she said, well, he's talking about the protests to the extent that you can draw a difference. One thing that she did not say is just what President Trump has put General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in charge of. He said on that call that it seemed to say that he was in charge of the National Guard rolling out to help contain these protests, which raises a lot of questions. She pulled away from that. So, it's ongoing right now. I guess we hold out hope for some answers. One other thing is that the president seemed to suggest that perhaps the other three officers in Minnesota should face charges. Of course, the one whose knee was on the neck of George Floyd. Kayleigh McEnany, the press secretary, deferred when asked whether he thinks that, in fact, those three should face charges, said it's up to the local authorities.
And Josh, what are you hearing from other quarters of the administration, especially about what's happening right there in Washington? I mean, literally steps from where the president and the seat of government is, at least the executive branch. I mean, so much attention has rightly been focused on the protests, initially peaceful, it seems like, during the day, but then as evening comes on, this is a very local story for those in Washington.
Well, we've seen the mayor of Washington has put in an earlier curfew tonight. She was criticized for last night's curfew being too late. The president on Friday had what's called a condition red at the White House, basically a bad situation where they put him down into a protected area briefly. And that Friday night to Saturday morning was really some of the most active protests we've seen right at the White House. They were sort of up against and jostling against one of the outer sort of temporary fences. This is at the front door of the White House for sure. And that is what has led to calls or questions of, look, where is the president's last public remarks on this other than tweets were Saturday? And, he hasn't addressed this in a way that maybe other presidents have in the past. And the White House pushing back strongly on that, saying he's addressed this in a number of ways, including on Saturday. Of course, we've had those tweets yesterday. Law and order was one. He looks to be sort of taking that law and order approach to it. He's not commenting at length on the causes of these protests in the first place, on the issues of racial injustice and police brutality or concerns therein. He's instead focusing on the result and saying these protests are now at a hand. We got to crack down on the protests. So I guess, the protesters would argue, I'm sure, that he's putting the cart before the horse.
Right, exactly, which is what came up with that briefing where the reporters were pushing to remind everybody this was about police brutality. It's not just about the protests and the aftermath. Josh, I do wonder, Jason was talking about the administration. Does the administration back what the president's doing, or are there internal voices that are saying you're the leader of the nation, and this is happening in many states, that you need to make some kind of statement from the Oval Office or some statement from Washington about this? You need to be, the one that pulls everyone together. I'm just curious about what's going on inside the White House.
It does appear that there's a bit of discussion on this, and I suppose you'd expect that in any case. But Brooke Rollins, who's the new acting head of the Domestic Policy Council, and fairly senior position in the administration, she said today at a Politico event that all options are on the table, and sort of hinted at, look, we're deciding what to do. What I think set the tone though for today was Kayleigh McEnany, of course, as we said, her briefing ongoing. She was on Fox this morning and said no speech from the Oval Office will do anything against Antifa. Again, that's those far left agitators that are sort of a loosely organized group, if organized at all. So I think that statement, set the tone. She's going on the show that President Trump watches every day to say, look, we don't see a lot of value in having a speech from the Oval Office. So I suppose it's possible we could see that. There are signs that there's discussions in the administration about that, but the press secretary herself is saying, look, President is going to focus on what he's focusing on, and right now, today, that is encouraging governors to call in the National Guard.
All right, Josh, listen, we really appreciate the debrief with you. Josh Wingrove, he's our Bloomberg News White House correspondent, joining us on the phone. All right, let's get another check on world and national news headlines. For that, let's turn things over to Mark Mills. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Carol. President Donald Trump urged states to crack down on nationwide protests in the aftermath of the death of a black man at the hands of police in Minneapolis. You have to dominate, Trump said Monday in a video conference with governors and law enforcement. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. They're going to run over you. You're going to look like a bunch of jerks. Trump urged 10-year jail time for some protesters. Bloomberg News obtained an audio recording of Trump's comments, which were reported earlier by CBS News. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo says protests across the U.S. over the death of George Floyd should spark a national ban on excessive force by police officers. The Democratic governor said he will be talking to Mayor Bill de Blasio about potential curfew in New York City, where there were reports of looting and some disturbing videos of police encounters with the crowds. Cuomo said violent activity by protesters plays into the hands of people and forces who don't want to make changes. Mayor de Blasio said police misconduct during the protests must also be addressed.
Any officer does the wrong thing, there need to be consequences, and they need to be fast.
George Floyd's family is set to release results Monday of their own autopsy into his death. Prosecutors say preliminary results of an official autopsy said the combined effects of being restrained, potential intoxicants in Floyd's system, and his underlying health issues, including heart disease, likely contributed to his death. Black pastors and politicians challenged Joe Biden on Monday to outline what he would do as president to ease access to economic opportunity and overhaul the criminal justice system as violent protests sweep the country. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Mark Mills. Back to Bloomberg.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their business strategically. Yet, the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating platform, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
I'm Steve Meyer, president of SEI's Investment Manager Services. At SEI, we understand the emerging forces that will define success for asset managers and what firms will need to compete tomorrow. That's why we continually optimize SEI's global operating platform. If your business requires greater agility, our advanced technology, integrated best-in-class systems, and multi-asset expertise can be your catalyst for business transformation.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize change.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
Are you interested in a challenging and
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Ready to talk brass tacks on what's happening in Major League Baseball?
Turn to the Effectively Wild podcast from Fangraphs for daily statistics, analysis, and commentary.
One team will say, yeah, we're going to keep paying minor leaguers their stipend, and another team will say, we're going to extend the stipend through this month, and then another team will say, nope, we're cutting them off. So are extending it at least through August, which would basically be the end of the minor league regular season.
Search Effectively Wild on TuneIn to listen.
The NHL is always on the ice with these awesome hockey podcasts on TuneIn. Get your goal with the Spittin' Chicklets podcast.
Brian Yandel, Keith Yandel, thanks for coming on. What's going on?
Nothing much. Glad to be here. You guys got some nice digs here.
We heard you took Southwest 2-stop flight to get out here.
Yeah, well, just
carve up the ice with NHL at the rink.
The other day I wrote a story. Artemi Panarin, Semyon Varlamov, Sergei Bobrovsky, they all helped arrange for the purchase of N95 masks to benefit hospitals in their respective markets. This is another one of those positive stories you're seeing.
Or create your own power play with Locked On NHL.
All these teams invested future assets to take a run at the Stanley Cup right now. Like, all of those teams would have a real serious gripe, like trading these multiple first-round picks to make a run at a cup. You're right.
Discover these and more NHL podcasts right here on TuneIn.
Are you fully informed on the NBA? On the NBA Hangtime podcast, veteran sports writers Sekou Smith and John Schumann analyze the latest NBA news, storylines, and discussions with guests from around the basketball universe.
Isaiah Thomas joined us here on the Hangtime podcast. Isaiah, good morning.
Everybody's doing well. As you know, my daughter tested positive.
Search NBA Hangtime on TuneIn to listen.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Looking for your daily fix of NFL news and analysis?
In that. So we had to blow it up with the Super Bowl predictions instead.
Look no further than the Pick Six podcast, where CBS sports writer Will Brinson gets you up to speed with what's trending in the NFL that day, so that you're always in the know.
Yeah, it's pretty revealing of Brinson's methodology for predictions. When he gets mad at people for predicting good teams are going to win the Super Bowl or good players are going to win major awards. That's how you wind up.
Search Pick Six on TuneIn to listen. Be part of the sports conversation with Sports Talk Radio on TuneIn. Join the discussion around your favorite local teams with sports stations broadcasting in your area.
The game will be 185 to 183 and somebody wins, whatever. Football, it's either full go or it's not. You got it's thud. I can practice what they call
Follow
thud.
national storylines and debates with ESPN Radio.
Does the NBA have a hiring problem when it comes to front office jobs in the leagues and a minority hiring issue? Stephen A. chimed in on that today on First Take.
It also resonates with me. Max, you can appreciate this position. One of the candidates was Brian Colangelo. We know what happened. I like Brian, but we know.
And hear what's happening worldwide with international channels like Talk Sport.
Seems as I'm sort of doing my life in reverse at the moment. I was on cricket tours when I was 20 years old, and now I'm 31. I'm sat at home injured playing PlayStation. So it's a tournament basically where you create your own character.
In your backyard and around the globe. Keep your finger on the pulse of the sports world with TuneIn.
And breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Stocks are climbing with the economy reopening amid unrest. We've got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all pushing higher right now. 13-point gain in the S&P 500 index, up by about 0.5%. NASDAQ is now up 65 points higher by 0.7%. The Dow up 81, up by 0.3%. 10-year yield 0.66%, down 4/32. Gold up 0.3%, $17.35 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.2%, $35.54 a barrel. Again, recapping, S&P higher up 13, up 0.5%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week, and I have to say, like many people, I was reading everything I could get my hands on over the weekend and was so happy to come across a story by Peter Coy, because we look to him to just put things in perspective. And his piece, it's online and on the Bloomberg, about Minneapolis, is really a terrific read. He joins us on the phone from New Jersey, as does Joel Weber, the editor of Bloomberg Business Week. He's on our remote line from Brooklyn. So, Joel, this was one of these, I don't know, it's hard to sort of say it's a gift at a time when there's so much turmoil going on, but it really was some important perspective. Help us understand what Peter set out to do before we get to him.
Well, I mean, first of all, like, the country is just reeling right now, and that was even before the weekend started. And
right.
I was talking with Peter a little bit, and he said, I know Jacob Frey, and that immediately just caught my attention because, I just always respect sort of wherever Peter's mind goes. But the angle that he hit on here was one that kind of, I think, is it's very prescient in that it takes into account everything that Minneapolis has really gone through, not only on Phrase Watch, but just historically. And I think that infused in the article, and it also helps us make sense of what happened in Minneapolis, which then led to obviously a much bigger national moment that we're all watching very closely now. Peter, what was for you when you kind of look at Frey and Minneapolis? What are the elements that have jumped out to you?
Oh, Minneapolis is well known as really a mecca of corporate philanthropy. They have a really dense concentration of Fortune 500, S&P 500 companies, and it can go down the list, but 3M, Best Buy, Target, on and on. And John D. Rockefeller, back in the 1970s, the third, that is, visited Minneapolis partly just to see, how could this one city be so famous for its corporate giving, and yet at the same time they have a very bad problem of racial inequality in housing and incomes and so on. So I just think it's tragic, and it deserves more study, partly because the people who subscribe to Bloomberg, read Bloomberg Business Week, listen to Bloomberg Radio, are the kind of people who work for some of these companies and think of themselves as doing the right thing, and yet somehow the right outcomes are not happening.
Well, and I'm going to say, we have a guest coming up after this, John Hope Bryan at Operation Hope, and I want to talk to him about corporate responsibility in all of this, because as you say, Peter, the Twin Cities, I mean, it's like a who's who's list of corporate America: Target, Cargill, Medtronic, 3M, Ecolabs, General Mills, Best Buy, U.S. Bank, and we've had conversations with so many different executives at different firms about, diversity, inclusion, equality, putting, programs in place at companies, and yet here we are.
Yep, that's a tragedy. So I know Jacob Frey, the mayor. He was a runner. He actually represented the U.S. in the Pan American Games in the marathon, and then at a young age he became the mayor. He's a very progressive kind of guy. And here he was doing sort of the right things to put Minneapolis on the track to reducing some of this racial inequality. This came along, and it's just devastating the city, and it's going to be hard to rebuild from this.
Peter, we wrote a feature, which you cite in your story last year, sort of about this movement that's been happening across the country, and Minneapolis became one of the most interesting places to watch, which is about YIMBY and NIMBY and sort of the end of zoning, single-family housing. What is the role between that and sort of what's happened in Minneapolis over time?
So a lot of cities around the country had basically segregation. Blacks were not allowed to live in certain neighborhoods, and that went away. But it was kind of replaced by zoning laws, which were not on their face segregationist, but had some of the same effects. 70% of the residential land in Minneapolis has been zoned for single families. A lot of blacks could not afford to buy houses, and they were stuck in apartments and not able to build wealth, and of course segregated. So Minneapolis became the first big city in the United States in 2018
to repeal single-family housing, which allows apartment buildings to be built all around the city. This is quite a dramatic event because you can imagine how many homeowners you might have been expected to resist this, and yet it passed the council and approved by the mayor. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about the city trying to move towards, fixing its original sins. And that's why it's so tragic that this happened anyway when they seem to be on a course towards better times.
And I know Peter, it's impossible to predict anything these days, and certainly it's too soon to make a lot of predictions about what happens tonight, much less what happens in the near to midterm. But, what does Minneapolis do at this point? And knowing what you do know about the leadership there, what do you think the playbook is?
I think we have to go back to the 1960s to see how it played out back then, and this is similar in some ways. It's a very slow process of healing. I'm sorry to say that it doesn't always work. I mean, there are cities like Newark and Detroit that were really lastingly damaged by the riots they had. There was white flight, there was business flight, and they're, to this day, depopulated and poorer than they were before those riots. Just praying that doesn't happen this time.
All right. Well, we're going to leave it there. We thank you both so much. Peter Coy, joining us, economics editor for Bloomberg Business Week, joining us on the phone from New Jersey, and Joel Weber, the editor of Bloomberg Business Week, joining us from Brooklyn. And Carol, it really is one of those stories that reminds us, I think, something that we're going to be talking about throughout the course of this show, and I'm guessing throughout the course of this week and maybe longer, which is everything, quoting Joel Weber, is a business story in many ways. And the economics of a place and the role of corporations. And as you said, we're going to talk about this in just a few minutes with John Hope Bryant. It has become even more important. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about, and I'm guessing you have too, is this notion of what do we expect companies to do and what do we expect them to say, and maybe in reverse order. We know that they're going to say something. What do we expect them to do? What is their responsibility at a time like this? And I feel like now more than ever, they have to act.
Well, this is nothing, it's not dissimilar to what we've been talking about with the virus, about, these inequalities. It's not like they all of a sudden just happen because of the virus. The same thing, with what we've seen play out in Minneapolis and really, elsewhere around the country. Not everyone is given the same equal start or access to opportunities. And we've talked so much about kind of, where you grow up, often means what kind of perhaps public education you get. And that means what kind of higher education you get and what kind of job you get and what kind of health care you get. I mean, it's all connected. And, I think it's really remarkable what the Minneapolis mayor tried to do in terms of single family zoning. I mean, this is how you start to change things. And I agree, Jason. I feel like we have been having these conversations. I know I certainly have in my career for years. Exactly. And so enough talking, and let's actually start to see some action.
All right. For those of you listening in New York, D.C., and San Francisco, watching on YouTube, Bloomberg Business Week is going to continue next with John Hope Bryant. If you're listening on 106.1 in Boston, Bay State Business, that is coming up next. This is Bloomberg.
At the start of every day,
This is a message from the government about the emergency measures to support the economy during the period of disruption caused by the coronavirus. To help you, your business, and your workers affected, you can apply for cash grants, business rate holidays, statutory sick pay relief packages, as well as the coronavirus job retention and self-employment income support schemes. For information, go to gov.uk/business-support now.
Where do sports, culture, and basketball nostalgia collide? On their podcast, Knuckleheads, NBA veterans Quentin Richardson and Darius Miles sit down with athletes, musicians, and entertainers to get brutally honest, totally unguarded conversations about everything from current events to untold stories from the golden era of sports.
O'Neal. You know that, right? I tried to tip dunk all the free throw line one time.
Search Knuckleheads on TuneIn to listen.
This is Mike Golick from ESPN's Golick and Wingo. Every morning, Trey Wingo, my son, and I sit down to discuss all the news, drama, and highlights spinning the sports world that day. And with TuneIn, you can hear us whenever and wherever you go. Just search Golick and Wingo to start listening today.
Let's be honest. We all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
He does! Fabry wins it!
To standout stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on TuneIn, you can hear every matchup of the 2019-2020 season so far. And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening.
With millions of podcasts dropping new episodes all the time, how do you keep up with all your favorites? TuneIn makes it easy. Simply head to the home screen and find your new episode section to see the latest additions.
Ready for some straight talk on what's happening in the MLB? On the Barstool Sports Podcast starting 9, Dallas Braden and Jared Carrabis cut through the BS to break down the league the way they really see it.
Yeah, we're continuing our little mini-series of college baseball coaches in addition to bringing you major league players from throughout the league. If you've been listening to Starting 9 for some time now, you know that we've had a big leaguer on every single episode for probably 2 years now.
Search Starting 9 on TuneIn to listen.
Financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We move into the final hour of trading on this back-to-work Monday with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing. 15-point gain right now for the S&P at 3,059, up 0.5%. The Dow up 103, higher by 0.4. NASDAQ rallying 69 points, up 0.7%. Tech stocks leading the way higher. We've got the 10-year right now down 2/32, and looking at a yield of 0.65%. Gold up 0.4%. 17.37 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.4%. 35.63 a barrel on West Texas Intermediate crude. Stocks higher as investors focus on signs of economic recovery amid further tension with China, lackluster virus drug test results, and the threat of further civil unrest in the U.S. Now, as for markets and the turmoil we saw in American streets over the weekend, Terry Haynes is the founder of Pangea Policy.
The markets have proved resilience in the past. You know, we went through what we went through in the last week in this country. We went through every weekend for years in the 60s and 70s. And the markets proved very resilient to that. And I anticipate they'll do so here today as well.
Analysts at Evercore ISI say Apple is on track for a market capitalization of $2 trillion over the next 4 years. They see a combination of earnings growth and a boost from the services and wearables business, helping the tech giant become the first company to reach that value. Apple shares, they are up today by 1.4%. In the year-to-date column on the Bloomberg, Apple is up by 9.7%, now trading at $322.22. San Francisco-based Zynga is buying Turkish mobile game maker Peak for $1.8 billion, marking its biggest acquisition yet. Zynga shares up now by 6.5% at $9.74. Recapping equities higher with the S&P up 16, a gain of 0.5%. The Dow is also up 0.5. NASDAQ higher by 0.8%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
Days since we all learned of and saw the death of George Floyd. We are definitely a nation in crisis once again. Back with us is John Hope Bryant. He's the founder, chairman, and CEO of the Atlanta-based Operation Hope. John is also chairman and chief executive officer of Bryant Group Ventures and co-founder of Global Dignity. He joins us on the phone from Atlanta. John, it's nice to have you back with us, but I do wish it was under different circumstances. I do feel like, you know, like the virus, there are things that persist in our society, inequalities, injustices, lack of accountability, you know, that were there, but we're seeing them once again front and center. It's horrible. I do wonder, you know, what happens as a result of what's happening in Minneapolis right now. What changes?
Consciousness is like a rubber band that is expanded. It never returns to its original size. First of all, thank you and your colleagues for all that you do. Thanks for being a light on the hill in a moment of darkness. The media is playing an outsized role in our consciousness these days because some of our national leaders are not stepping up in a way that's holistic, that's bridge building, that's bringing us together, that's providing a light and a way forward. So thank you guys for doing that.
Thank you.
Again, a rubber band is expanded. It doesn't return to its original size. It's forever extended. And so when things like this happen, you stop having black people saying, I feel discriminated against, and white people saying, I have no idea what you're talking about. As Will Smith said, the racism did not get discovered, it got filmed. And now when something like this happens, it just becomes undeniable. It's like the people of goodwill, which are most people, just go, that's just ridiculous. Like that's disgusting. We can't. That's not our nation. That's not what if that's my child? And we start having a we conversation and not a me you conversation, and then you can begin to do something about it. Over the weekend I've had a problem with the looting and. Operation was founded after the Rodney King riots in 1992, so this strikes me very close to home. We're the largest what we do in the country because we responded differently to the riot after it was over. Decided to respond, not react. But this rioting and the looting, if that continues, we will destroy the moral authority that George Floyd's death gave us to honor his legacy. This weekend, though, I was, talking to some young people, and they said, John, you get to be at the table. You get to talk to people. You get to do media. You get to go to the White House. You get to go CEOs' offices and so on. But they listen to you. We've been talking. My grandfather was talking. My father's been talking. I'm talking. They don't listen to us. No one listens to us until we tear some stuff up. So they said, look, we don't want to tear stuff up. It's primarily not us tearing stuff up. We've been infiltrated, so on and so forth. But when stuff gets torn up, people are actually listening to us. So now we can hand the baton back to you to go talk for us in these boardrooms and hopefully cut a deal to get me an internship, to stop the poverty, increase the peace, increase some legislation to get us some fairness. And I think that goes back to that Dr. King quote. He said that violence is the language of the unseen and the unheard. Dr. King wasn't endorsing violence. He was acknowledging the pain.
Well, and John, I'm glad you brought up Dr. King because you're there in Atlanta, and I think a lot of us saw your mayor, and I'm from Atlanta, as you know, and so I was paying very close attention, even closer attention to it, the legacy of Dr. King and the legacy of so many others, whether it's former Mayor Andy Young, whether it's obviously Congressman Lewis, and so many others like you who are down there in Atlanta, which has, again, such a rich legacy here. What have you learned, and what are we learning there that maybe we can take in a broader sense? Because Mayor Bottoms, spoke so passionately about that legacy, and I wonder how that translates, especially to a business audience.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I think that this goes back, by the way, things are calming down here, while things are popping off and heating up other places. We're starting to transition a bit here. And I think it's in part because the mayor, who's a black woman, said, stop the looting. Like, you're not honoring our legacy. This is ridiculous. She behaved like a parent. And a lot of our national leaders are not behaving like good parents. But she behaved like a good parent. Then you had that. Then you had corporate leaders step up, yes. But you had moral leaders like Andrew Young, Ambassador Andrew Young, my mentor, say, you're breaking my heart. I'm crying now. We didn't give our lives for this. Then you had T.I. and Killer Mike from the hip hop generation saying, "Hey guys, hey, we own property over here. Like,
right?
All this looting. Like, this is not the way. This is not the way, right? So it becomes culturally unsexy, culturally unacceptable for those who want to deal in this world we live in after this is over to continue with this. So we acknowledge the pain, we acknowledge all that, but Atlanta's just to me, Atlanta's a moral center of America because of the civil rights legacy. This, to me, speaks to going back to the 60s. Birmingham, Alabama, and Memphis could have been Atlanta. Actually more population, better location for an international airport, but they fought over race. and we decide to fight over money.
Hey, John.
And that became the conversation at this time. Is, hey, you guys,
right?
You can't destroy the CNN Center. You can't destroy the mall, right? This is where our friends work. This is where your cousin works on Monday. You can't destroy it on Sundays. You got to go to work on Monday. Go ahead.
No, that's a really good point. John, just unfortunately only got about 40 seconds left here. I mean, Atlanta, Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, these are all cities that are, home to a lot of well-known corporations. What's the responsibility of CEOs and companies in all of this? A lot of them have diversity programs. They talk a lot. But what do we need to see in terms of action? And my apologies, only got about 30 seconds.
Reimagine your budget. Look at your annual budget. If your budget has a B attached to it, reimagine your budget. Where are your interns going? Where are your apprenticeships going? Where's your advertising dollars going? Where are your subcontractors going? And see if you can empower minorities and underserved and women with those opportunities, because that's going to create peace. The best way to stop a bullet is a job. This is about poverty.
All right. Well, we really appreciate your time. We wish we had more. We're going to have you back really soon. What a treat. John Hope Bryan, as Carol said, we wish it were under different circumstances, but there are a few voices who are as clear as yours. We really appreciate it. Founder and CEO of Operation Hope, joining us on the phone from my hometown, Atlanta, and it does have a very rich legacy. All right, let's get back to Mark Mills. He has got World of National Headlines. Hey, Mark.
Jason, thanks. President Donald Trump on Monday derided many governors as weak and demanded tougher crackdowns on burning and stealing among some demonstrations in the aftermath of violent protests in dozens of American cities. Trump spoke to governors on a video teleconference that also included law enforcement and national security officials, telling the state leaders they have to get much tougher. Most of you are weak, said Trump. You have to arrest people. The brother of George Floyd appealed for peace Monday in the aftermath of riots and arson fires following the death of his brother in Minneapolis. Wearing a face mask with the image of his brother's face on it, Terrence Floyd appeared at the intersection in South Minneapolis where his brother died a week ago.
Let's do this another way. Let's do this another way. Let's stop thinking that our voice don't matter. That's right. And vote. There you go. Not just vote for the president, vote for the preliminaries, vote for everybody. Educate yourself.
New York's mayor says he's considering putting the city under curfew after nights of destruction followed 3 days of largely peaceful protests over George Floyd's death. Mayor Bill de Blasio had previously rejected imposing a curfew. Now he says it's under consideration, but no final decision has been made. The first astronauts launched by SpaceX declared victory Monday in NASA's Cosmic Capture the Flag game. They quickly claimed the prize left behind at the International Space Station nearly a decade ago by the last crew to launch from the U.S. Congratulations, SpaceX, you got the flag, said NASA astronaut Doug Hurley. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Mark Mills.
When you follow the facts,
Bloomberg's been reporting on this intelligence community report.
When you seek out the experts,
the investment banks that Bloomberg speak to also want some relief.
No matter what else is happening,
it's been pretty hard to read the signals.
At least you know what's real.
The economic fallout from the virus risks becoming entrenched.
Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, weekdays at 1 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma.
At age 30, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, you can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
With COVID-19, so much is unknown.
Is this the worst you've seen?
But we are committed to getting you every piece of information we can as soon as we can.
Tell us about this first big win you have. What is it, 24 million N95 masks?
Fewer unknowns.
Who's winning here? Where is the pressure right now?
That's our goal.
What worries you the most? The time it's going to take for a vaccine?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
You're fierce. You take care of business and don't hold back. Taking care of your health shouldn't be any different. You know when something's off. Don't ignore symptoms like fatigue, joint pain, and rashes. Listen to your body. It could be lupus. We're here to help you take control. Learn how at BeFierceTakeControl.org. Brought to you by the Lupus Foundation of America and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Bloomberg and Eaton Vance are proud to...
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care. About each other. About our planet. About creating a better world for everyone. And becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Make sure to accept your offer by the UCAS deadline and visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Did you know that with TuneIn's local radio feature, you can stream live FM and AM stations broadcasting in your area? Discover local news, talk, and music stations. Navigate to the local radio section under Browse to listen locally on TuneIn.
Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind. Giving up, I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the country.
Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier. That also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is...
Or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, and it may be recency bias having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on TuneIn.
Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
Yeah, but it's unique times. I think there's unique circumstances, and we're trying to
standout stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
Looking for your daily fix of NFL news and analysis?
In that. So we had to blow it up in the Super Bowl predictions instead.
Look no further than the Pick Six podcast, where CBS sports writer Will Brinson gets you up to speed with what's trending in the NFL that day, so that you're always in the know.
Yeah, it's pretty revealing of Brinson's methodology for predictions. When he gets mad at people for predicting good teams are going to win the Super Bowl or good players are going to win major awards. That's how you wind up.
Search Pick Six on TuneIn to listen.
Trey Wingo here from ESPN's Golic and Wingo. Every morning, Mike Golic Jr., and I sit down to discuss all the news, drama, and highlights spinning the sports world that day. And with TuneIn, you can hear us whenever and wherever you go. Just search Golic and Wingo and start listening today.
Ready for some straight talk on what's happening in the MLB? On the Barstool Sports Podcast starting 9, Dallas Brayton and Jared Carrabis cut through the BS to break down the league the way they really see it.
Yeah, we're continuing our little mini-series of college baseball coaches in addition to bringing you major league players from throughout the league. If you've been listening to Starting 9 for some time now, you know that we've had a big leaguer on every single episode for probably 2 years now.
Search Starting 9 on TuneIn to listen.
Breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We've got 43 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. Stocks higher across the board. Let's head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here's Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. That's right. U.S. stocks in the green today with FANG stocks outperforming again. Dow's currently up 80 points. S&P's gained 13. NASDAQ climbs by 62. The U.S. 10-year yield at 0.66%. WTI crude futures are a little changed. Gold gains 8, and transports are also little changed. Leaders to the upside in the Dow, Boeing, Goldman Sachs, and ExxonMobil, while Pfizer fell 7%. and led to the downside. In other news, the New York new virus cases fell below 1,000 for the first time in 11 weeks. And wrapping things up, Domino's Pizza gained as much as 2.2%, hitting a record high of $3.94 a share. And Zoom Video rose as much as 14.7%. The company reports tomorrow. Live from the First Breaking News Desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill. And to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg Time Squawk, SQUAWK on your terminal, I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Well, protests that they are obviously going on here across the United States, and we hope things will continue to calm as we go through the course of this week. Protests, though, they are nothing new in China and specifically in Hong Kong. We've been talking about it for months and months. They have restarted with a vengeance, and it's all because of a continuing conflict between Beijing and Hong Kong. Andy Brown has been following that incredibly closely, editorial director, of course, for Bloomberg New Economy. He lived in that part of the world for many, many years, and he's been following it for us and sharing his conversations with us, and we love having him back. He's on the phone from New Hampshire. So, Andy, we've all been sort of domestically focused, I think, rightly so, over the past 48 to 72 hours. But, you know, meanwhile, this issue with China and with Hong Kong and involving the relationship between the United States and China has continued to escalate. What's the most important thing we need to know here?
Well, there is actually a direct connection between protests in the United States and protests in Hong Kong. The Chinese government, of course, gloats at whenever the United States gets into trouble and is able to tell a domestic audience that, look, our system is superior. America is in decline. Lots of talk about, U.S. hypocrisy, criticizing the response to pro-democracy demonstrations in Hong Kong, and then noting the behavior of some of the police against protesters and the media here in the United States. But the immediate connection with Hong Kong is that, every June 4th, many protesters, thousands of protesters in Hong Kong take to the streets to commemorate the anniversary of the crushing of the pro-democracy protests in Beijing's Tiananmen Square on June the 4th in 1989. And this is the first real test of this national security law, which China's parliament ran through over the heads of the Hong Kong legislature. And the Hong Kong police have banned that protest. So a lot of people say, well, this national security law won't have any impact. It will just sort of be parked to one side, never get used. And already you're seeing the effect in terms of a political tightening in Hong Kong. Of course, the police say this is a COVID-19 restriction, but very clearly this was the pretext to prevent commemoration this year.
What do you make of the continued, Andy, escalation between the two? As you said, China, kind of pointing out to President Trump's own domestic woes because of these protests and talking about double standards, between what's going on here and versus Hong Kong. At the same time, we have China, halting some U.S. farm imports, so that threatens that phase one of the trade deal. So how do we put that all in context, kind of those moves together?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting when Donald Trump on Friday, when he announced the official response, U.S. response to the passage of this national security law, and he promised a very tough response, and then we were all wondering what that might be. And in fact, it was a very watery, vague sort of statement that was sort of long on anguish and outrage and short on specifics. And very importantly, he did not say that the U.S. would abandon the phase one trade deal. and that's really critical. I mean, we've talked about this before as being one of the few slender threads that now hold the relationship between the U.S. and China together. So much so that, today in Hong Kong, or yesterday in Hong Kong, the markets took Trump's pronouncements on Hong Kong as a reason to buy, and we saw stocks going up.
Yeah, I mean, that's the amazing thing, and I'm glad you went there, because amid all of this, I mean, we're looking at this here in the United States, but also in China, this notion that investors say, all right, like, we can deal with this, like, we're just going to keep buying, folks. How do you square that as someone who looks at the new economy?
Yeah, look, there's probably more sound and thunder in this than anything else, because the truth of the matter is that there's a lot of talk. Will Trump renege, or will
right.
Trump throw Hong Kong out of this sort of special trading relationship with the U.S.? The truth is that Hong Kong, the United States runs a very large trade surplus with Hong Kong, and if it actually did away with Hong Kong's special trading status, it would hurt the U.S. and U.S. companies far more than it would Hong Kong. So the fact is that there isn't a whole lot that the U.S. that Trump can do to hit back against China over Hong Kong without hurting its own interests. I mean, it's quite a dilemma that the White House now faces.
Yeah, it is interesting, and as complicated as it is, there are some very clear economic consequences or lack thereof, depending on where you're looking. All right, Andy Brown, thank you so much, editorial director for Bloomberg New Economy. We're so happy to catch up with him every week, because it's a story. There are a lot of connections to it, Carol.
Well, and you got to really understand trade and what the consequences are, because in many ways, U.S. companies are ultimately the ones that get hurt in this process. So you really have to understand the details and nuances of the trade back and forth. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar, Jason Kelly on this Monday, and this is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Buyers remain in control on Wall Street, but it's a cautious rally amid continued civil unrest in many parts of the country. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 88, the S&P 500 up 13, the Nasdaq is up 63. Mental health strains stemming from the COVID-19 pandemic have led to a shortage of one of the most widely prescribed antidepressants. Pfizer's Zoloft is used to treat depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and PTSD. Mobile game maker Zynga is making one of its biggest acquisitions ever. It's agreed to pay $1.8 billion for Turkey's Peak. The deal will add Peak's Toon Blast and Toy Blast puzzle games to Zynga's game library. With road trips expected to be popular this summer because of the pandemic, SunTrust Robinson Humphrey says Hostess brands will likely benefit. It says Twinkies, Ding Dongs, and other Hostess snack cakes will be popular provisions for those trips. Larry Kofsky, Bloomberg Radio.
Hi, I'm your host, Smokey Colbert, filling in for Smokey because after 75 years of...
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Turns out there's much more to say. Nearly 90% of wildfires are caused by us humans being careless, dumping our used barbecue coals willy-nilly. Guess the song was wrong. We did start the fire. That's why I respect Mother Nature and her trees, whether coniferous or new car scented. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
In-depth analysis, concise reporting, need-to-know global business news. Around the world and across the markets, Bloomberg connects the dots for decision makers. Stay on top of today's headlines. Follow big breakthroughs in tech. Understand the latest political issues. See how the world's wealthiest are spending their money. Track what's happening in the markets, and much more. Subscribe today to Bloomberg, the global standard for business reporting. Get it all at Bloomberg.com/subscriptions. Market upheavals.
The narrative is driven by...
This is a message from the government about the emergency measures to support the economy during the period of disruption caused by the coronavirus. To help you, your business, and your workers affected, you can apply for cash grants, business rate holidays, statutory sick pay relief packages, as well as the coronavirus job retention and self-employment income support schemes. For information, go to gov.uk/business-support now.
Be part of the sports conversation with Sports Talk Radio on TuneIn. Join the discussion around your favorite local teams with sports stations broadcasting in your
The game
area.
will be 185 to 183, and somebody wins, whatever. Football, it's either full go or it's not. You got like, oh, it's thud. I can practice what they call
Follow
thud.
national storylines and debates with ESPN Radio.
Does the NBA have a hiring problem when it comes to front office jobs in the leagues and a minority hiring issue? Stephen A. chimed in on that today on First Take.
It also resonates with me. Max, you can appreciate this position. One of the candidates was Brian Colangelo. We know what happened. I like Brian, but we know...
And hear what's happening worldwide with international channels like Talk Sport.
Seems as I'm sort of doing my life in reverse at the moment. I was on cricket tours when I was 20 years old, and now I'm 31. I'm out sat at home injured playing PlayStation. So it's a tournament basically where you create your own character.
In your backyard and around the globe. Keep your finger on the pulse of the sports world with TuneIn. Behind the highlight reels, championship rings, and colossal paychecks, there are sports stories that fuel, deepen, and even challenge our love for the game. For true tales of underdogs, anti-heroes, and game-changing innovators, explore a sports documentary on TuneIn, like Sports Wars, telling the origin stories of classic rivalries, Raise Sports, about the concussion crisis that threatens football's future, and Dunkumentaries, a podcast devoted to the beauty and power of the slam dunk. For these and more, search sports documentaries on TuneIn.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind. Giving up, I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the country.
Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier. That also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is...
Or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, and it may be recency bias having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on TuneIn. Wanna bet football can make you feel nostalgic?
Playing days are over, so...
On the podcast, NFL Alumni Lounge, Charlie Booth sits down with retired NFL legends to talk about their careers, life after football, and everything in between.
Mr. Darren Waller, good to have you.
Yes, sir, it's good to be here.
Dana White, welcome to the Alumni Lounge.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Big member of our NFL alumni family, the CEO of the XFL, Mr. Oliver Luck.
Charlie, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
We're here with the president, Mr. Eric Price. Good to see you.
Search NFL Alumni Lounge on TuneIn to listen.
Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
Yes, indeed. Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master along with Jason Kelly. Coming up, we got the chart of the day with Dave Wilson, and he's taking a look at the bear market.
Yes, indeed. And maybe defining it and putting some parameters in a way that you might not expect. I like it.
Exactly.
How's he going to find a song for that, though?
I have no idea. All right, stick around for that. Let's get back to your top business stories and another update on the trading day. We've got 29 minutes to go, Charlie.
Stocks higher across the board right now with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing. 102-point gain for the Dow, up 0.4%. S&P's up 14, up 0.5%. NASDAQ up 72, higher by 0.8%. Stocks higher as investors focus on signs of economic recovery amid further tension with China, lackluster virus drug test results, and the threat of further civil unrest in the United States. Let's begin with Gilead Sciences. Its drug remdesivir showed showed only a limited benefit in a large trial of more moderate patients with COVID-19, a result that may shift perceptions of the therapy already cleared for use in severe cases of the disease. Gilead Sciences shares, they are moving lower today by 3.1% on a day when the rest of the market is moving higher. Some schools around the world are reopening to students as coronavirus lockdowns ease, raising questions about the timing and the potential impact on school children. Dr. Joshua Sharfstein is Vice Dean at the Bloomberg Johns Hopkins School of Public Health.
So you have to imagine that there are some families, if there are very vulnerable people at home, that are going to be very nervous about sending their kids to school, and that's understandable. So I think most places are going to be offering an online option in that case. Same for teachers who may be particularly vulnerable, older teachers with chronic illness. May not be a good idea for them to be the first to return to the classroom.
The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Gun-related stocks are higher after a weekend of protests across the country. Among some of the gun names that are standing out today, Sturm Ruger, its shares up now by 9.6%. Smith & Wesson brands up by 16.1%. Vista Outdoor Inc. up now by 10.8%. 10-year down 3/32 with a yield of 0.66%. Gold up 0.5%. 17.39 the ounce, and crude West Texas Intermediate up 0.6%, 35.69 a barrel. Again, recapping, equities higher with the S&P up 15, up 0.5%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thanks so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week right here on Bloomberg Radio.
But a different version, it sounds like.
Is it Us and Them?
It is.
There we go. Boom. Nailed it.
Done.
Thank you, Dave. I actually knew
the original version from Dark Side of the Moon, Carol. So there you go.
That's what I thought. It was a little bit different, right?
Yeah.
Well, it kind of cuts in the middle. But
yeah.
There was actually a roadie for Pink Floyd who talked about that short, sharp shock, which you'll find in the headline of my latest chart. So that's
Wait, did you say you were a roadie for Pink Floyd? That's what I thought I heard.
It wasn't mine.
No, he said it was a roadie who came up with that phrase.
I just all of a sudden it took me to a whole different place. That's all I'm going to say, Dave Wilson.
You hear what you want to hear. What can I tell you?
That is so true.
If no truer words were ever said.
And if you look at stocks, you see what you want to see sometimes. And that brings me to the chart. Really taking a look at the S&P 500, you figure indeed what we went through in February and March was kind of a short, sharp shock because, you had a record in February for the index and then you're in a bear market within the space of 5 weeks or less, depending on how you're counting. But what's interesting, Willie Delwich, who's a strategist for Robert W. Baird, kind of pointed out what was going on with the value line geometric index. Now, this is an indicator. It's based on the companies that the Value Line Investment Survey tracks, about 1,700 of them. And it basically tracks the average performance day in and day out among those 1,700 stocks. So when you look at that indicator, you find out that it peaked back in August 2018, and that was about 18 months before the high was reached for the S&P 500. And then by the time you got to the lows of March, and the value line geometric hit bottom on the same day as the S&P 500, it was down. The value line index was down more than 48%. Now, that sounds like a bear market. 18 months plus 48% decline. Not what we saw with the S&P 500, where it was off, 34% in the space of 5 weeks. So, it's an interesting bit of perspective. And how much has been said about, the biggest companies propping up the S&P 500 over time. You really see it in this comparison. And if you haven't seen the comparison yet, folks, send me an email. I'll get you the chart, the explanation that goes with it, and everything I do going forward. The email address is dwilson@bloomberg.net. That's dwilson@bloomberg.net.
I have a follow, but I do want to bring a headline to everyone because this is an important one. New York City will have a curfew. Governor Andrew Cuomo putting that out, making some comments on radio. So, again, New York City will indeed have a curfew. And that, of course, is in response to the protests that we've seen come up over the weekend around the country, of course, because of the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. So, again, Governor Andrew Cuomo saying that New York City will indeed have a curfew. Back to you, Dave, and your chart. So if we have U.S. stocks have been in a bear market for far longer and fallen much more than the S&P 500 suggests, does that make it much more real? Because I do feel like some people were kind of blowing it off a little bit and putting it to the nervousness over the virus and, maybe not giving it credit.
Well, more real, as I pose one way you could describe it. Another is just more typical. Yeah. Because, bear markets tend to stretch over a couple of years. I mean, we've seen that with the last few bear markets we've had in U.S. stocks. And, so the time frame you're talking about is much more what you might expect if you look at the value line geometric index than what you had with the S&P 500, where it was down, 34% in 5 weeks. That's really the point.
Yeah, it is. It's a really interesting point, and I like the analysis, too, because I feel like we are subject to some gyrations owing to, the different weightings and things like that we've talked about in this segment before. Dave Wilson, always making us smarter and bringing us some good music. We really appreciate it. We'll catch up with you right after the close of trading. And as we are taking a look at all the major indices, they remain in the green, not strongly up, but probably up in a way that we probably didn't expect when we came in this morning, and certainly looking at all the headlines last night, Carol, but a certain resilience there across all the major stock markets.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're staying, as you said, at our highs of this session. All right, we're going to get back to the markets in just a moment. Right now, though, let's get back to World and National News headlines and back to Mark Mills. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Carol. President Trump is doubling down on his hard-line reaction to the violent protests across the country. Bloomberg's Nathan Hager with the story.
CBS News says it's gotten audio from a teleconference the president held with governors on the unrest. The president reportedly told them, quote, "Most of you are weak," urging them to crack down even harder on demonstrators. In the president's words, quote, "They're going to run over you. You're going to look like a bunch of jerks. You have to dominate," end quote. On the call, the president told governors Washington will be under much more control. In his words, "We're going to pull in thousands of people." Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
Facebook employees became increasingly bold in expressing their dismay at CEO Mark Zuckerberg's decision not to take action on incendiary comments posted by President Trump, staging a virtual walkout. Several senior figures at Facebook working from home declared their strong disagreement online over the weekend, deciding not to log into work on Monday in protest. 2 Atlanta Police Department officers were fired Sunday after video showed them using excessive force against 2 college students during protests Saturday night. Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottom says the message of the protesters is understandable, but not the actions of those looting and causing destruction.
My fear is that the message and the need for change will get lost in the destruction. And it is difficult when you have officers on the street who are human and they are fatigued and they are stressed.
Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's Analytics, says the protests highlight the depth of despair in America in the midst of a steep recession. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Mark Mills. Carolyn Jason.
Why do hedge funds and other alternative managers rely on Pershing for a highly personalized experience? Mark Alderati, a managing director at BNY Mellon's Pershing and head of Prime Services, explains.
In today's fast-paced environment, where the only constants are change and volatility, you need a prime broker who's both steady and agile, focused on supporting your needs so that you can focus on growing your business and producing results. Exceptional client service and advocating for our clients is at the core of what we do. Our award-winning high-touch team is just one of the benefits of working with BNY Mellon. We help alternative investment managers create great experiences for their clients. Whether it's customized financing, securities lending solutions, platform access, or outsourced trading, BNY Mellon's Pershing is a prime broker who's committed to this business and dedicated to meeting your evolving demands.
To learn more about the unique and industry-leading solutions for hedge funds and other alternative managers, visit Pershing.com. Pershing LLC. Member FINRA, NYSE, SIPC.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then go to Babbel.com, download the app, and try it for free. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just go to Babbel.com and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or go to Babbel.com and try it for free. That's Babbel.com.
The world's financial decision makers connect.
Who says you can't have a laugh while getting serious about America's pastime? On the daily podcast Locked On MLB, comedian and baseball fanatic Paul Francis Sullivan talks about each team, each pennant race, and everything else in the game, from rule changes and controversies to baseball cards and stadium food.
For those of you who are not familiar with me or the old show, I love to obsess over baseball. I'm talking baseball over the Super Bowl. We had a TV showing the division series during my wedding.
Search Locked On MLB on TuneIn to listen today.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on TuneIn, you can hear every matchup of the 2019-2020 season so far. And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search classic Game Replays to start listening.
With millions of podcasts dropping new episodes all the time, how do you keep up with all your favorites? TuneIn makes it easy. Simply head to the home screen and find your new episode section to see the latest additions.
Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind, giving up. I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the country.
Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier. That also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is...
Or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, and it may be recency bias having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on TuneIn.
Are you ready for the realest first-hand take of what's happening in the NBA? On their podcast, All the Smoke, former NBA players Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson bring their fiery intensity to the mic, dishing on the latest news and drama from on and off the court without boundaries.
Half man, half amazing. My friend, our brother, Vince Carter, man, welcome to the show.
Yo, what's up, man? What's up, my brother? Man,
Search All the Smoke on TuneIn to listen.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Brian Windhorst and the Hoop Collective Podcast.
What about Giannis Antetokounmpo? He is going to be eligible to sign a Supermax extension, which we were projecting to be worth $240 million this summer. Well, if the salary cap drops, and even if he's wonderfully happy in Milwaukee, it may make no sense for him to sign when he can just wait a year and wait for the revenues to recover and then lock in.
Subscribe to Brian Windhorst and the Hoop Collective.
Search the Hoop Collective to listen.
Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and and live sporting events.
Yeah, but it's unique times. I think there's unique circumstances, and we're trying to
stand out stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
It's 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We've got 13 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. And repeating an earlier headline, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo says New York City will have a curfew. The governor made the comment in a radio interview saying, quote, there is going to be a curfew. He added that 8,000 police officers will be out tonight. The Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ, they're all higher, holding on to gains now with the S&P up 10 at 3,054, up by about 0.3%. The Dow's up 79, up 0.3. NASDAQ is up 60, up by 0.6%. Stocks higher as investors focus on signs of economic recovery amid further tension with China, lackluster virus drug test results, and the threat of further civil unrest in the United States. Right now, the 10-year's down 3/32 with a yield of 0.66%. Gold up 0.6%, 17.40 the ounce, and crude West Texas Intermediate up 0.1%, 35.51 a barrel. Again, recapping, equities higher with the S&P up 9, up 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me, I want to drive. Just drive, baby.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
It is time for the Drive to the Close. Emily Rowland is back with us, co-chief investment strategist at John Hancock Investments, based in Boston, and that's exactly where we find her on this Monday. Emily, nice to have you back with Jason and myself. So tell us a little bit about kind of where we are in this market. We kicked off our broadcast a couple of hours ago. Regina Martin-Adams saying, looking at the outcome, we're seeing broad-based gains, stocks, a lot of them above their 200-day moving average, the S&P above it. I don't know. When you look at the market, what does it tell you?
Well, thanks, Carol, for having me today, and Jason. And certainly there's quite a bit of optimism that's being priced in by the markets today. And, it seems that we wake up every morning and futures are higher once again, despite some of the really negative headlines we're seeing. And certainly, with the country struggling right now, that's a challenge. We may see some recent events, start to dent some of the green shoots that we started to see from an economic perspective. But really, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is markets are reacting to this incredible amount of fiscal and monetary stimulus that we've seen. The Fed's balance sheet is now sitting near $7 trillion. That's a 30% increase in just 3 months. Europe's getting its act together in terms of providing stimulus. Japan. So we continue to see this incredible support that's really outweighing all these challenges and uncertainty that continues to face the markets today.
It is really remarkable. I mean, I have to say, that it's just a measure of cognitive dissonance that we're all kind of learning to live with here. Emily, I also wonder, looking at my Bloomberg terminal here and looking at year to date, and there it is standing out in the green, the NASDAQ. It's just remarkable to look at. And, we've been talking about this with Dave Wilson, our stocks guy, a lot. How do you sort of think about that? And is this just a few names that dominate the index there? Or what do you make of it?
Yeah, I was just listening to Dave's commentary, and I think his chart is spot on and so relevant right now. And what we've seen start to happen as the reopening and this positive news is priced in more, is we have seen a broadening of participation in the market, and a lot of ink's been spilled on that in recent days. But we think it's really important because there have been some parts of the market that have just been left behind on this rally. Tech being up 7% year to date. Meanwhile, financials up around, down, 23-24% year to date. That's a huge mismatch here between the winners and the losers. We take technology, it's an area of the market that we've been overweight, but that's really been like the only trade of 2020. And it's kind of like congratulations to folks that have been overweight there and have in those positions. But we think that we continue to see markets rally on this sentiment, and we see more and more investors coming off the sidelines, which is what you're seeing. You could see this broadening participation in the markets play out with areas like small and mid caps coming back, value kind of staging some gains here, as well as potentially seeing some ultimate participation from the international side. We're not totally sold on the rotation to cyclicals yet from a thematic standpoint or a longer term standpoint. We think you actually need to see some real meaningful reacceleration in economic growth besides just the data getting less worse. But we think from a tactical perspective here, investors may want to reallocate assets into those parts of the market that have been relatively beaten down.
And just to press that, Emily, in keeping what you just said, so your advice is trim tech for financials at this point?
That's right. And again, it's likely a bit of a tactical trade for now until we get some confirmation that we're really going to have this reacceleration in economic growth. And frankly, we're not totally convinced it's there yet. Lots of uncertainty still. Economic data is going to get, still challenged. I mean, I know we're seeing a bounce off the bottom here and a potential bottoming process play out and things like PMI data, and that's great. And we're optimistic because of it. We still think that there's a lot of uncertainty. This reopening could be uneven. It could be controversial. We could see another wave of the virus. Those are absolutely impossible or nearly impossible to handicap at this point. So we want to stay balanced. We want to participate in the market because we want to respect the rally here, but we want to do it in a really disciplined way. So that means owning some quality growth still, but potentially thinking about leaning more into value in order to keep those portfolios balanced.
And Emily, just before we let you go, I mean, I do wonder, as we're into this, Carol and I spend so much of our time every day talking about how various businesses have changed. How's your business changed? You work with a big group of people, with a very well-known company. And of course, the saddest thing about reading the name John Hancock is the cancellation of the Boston Marathon. We can dwell on that another time. But I do wonder how your day-to-day has changed and how you think it's going to change going forward.
Yeah, it's a great question. Manulife, John Hancock, big company. I think we've responded really well to some of the challenges that have been presented. But just like so many other people, I've had to adjust to this new environment of spending my time more working from home. I used to spend about 2/3 of my time out on the road meeting with financial advisors. I've tried to replicate those conversations by doing Zoom meetings, but frankly, there's just nothing that beats that face-to-face contact. Yeah. So I am personally really looking forward to re-engaging and getting back out there. But for now, we're going to stay home and do our economic analysis from here, and also help our kids do their homework at the same time.
You sound like you're ready. I'm just going to put it out there.
I am done teaching 1st and 4th grade. I can tell you that much.
Well, kudos to you, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right. Emily Rowland, thank you so much. Co-Chief Investment Strategist for John Hancock Investment Management, joining us on the phone from Boston and, doing a lot of juggling, as many of us
everybody.
Like everybody. And, we're seeing some sort of return in sight. We've been talking about it very tentatively. But it is amazing how much, how long folks, especially those of us who are used to, being out there, have not been out there at all. It's really kind of
think about how many trips that we didn't take. I was thinking it's about probably like a half a dozen, easily.
Oh, at least. Yeah.
At least, in terms of being home these last few weeks, and at least planning. All right, folks, we're going to count you down to the closing bell on this Monday. Yeah, it's only Monday. But as we mentioned, stocks are up. They're holding near their highs. Not huge gains, up about 4%, 0.4%, excuse me, on the S&P and the Dow, and the NASDAQ up about 0.7%. So we'll count you down to the closing bell. I bet I woke up everyone. You're all awake now. Stick around. Here comes the closing bell.
With a new day comes new COVID-19.
You know that feeling when you get more than you expected? Like discovering that the box of chocolates has a whole other layer underneath, or scoring extra poppadoms with your takeaway. Or joining Tesco Mobile and finding out you get the latest phones and 99% UK network coverage. Yeah, that moment. Feels good, right? Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
99% 4G population coverage indoors and outdoors across UK.
This is a message from the government about the emergency measures to support the economy during the period of disruption caused by the coronavirus. To help you, your business, and your workers affected, you can apply for cash grants, business rate holidays, statutory sick pay relief packages, as well as the coronavirus job retention and self-employment income support schemes. For information, go to gov.uk/business-support now.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Ready for a one-of-a-kind look at the NFL? On the PFF NFL podcast, Steve Palazzolo and Sam Munson interpret the unique stats of Pro Football Focus to analyze the league, uncover secret superstars, and discuss which teams to watch out for in the next Super Bowl.
Let's talk some football. Let's do it, Steve. All sorts of stuff. We're going to do most improved defenses around the NFL. Solomon Wilcots, our very own. He went into some detail over at PFF.com. Most improved defenses around the NFL.
Search PFF NFL on TuneIn to listen. Behind the highlight reels, championship rings, and colossal paychecks, there are sports stories that fuel, deepen, and even challenge our love for the game. For true tales of underdogs, anti-heroes, and game-changing innovators, explore a sports documentary on TuneIn, like Sports Wars, telling the origin stories of classic rivalries, Raise Sports, about the concussion crisis that threatens football's future, and Dunkumentaries, a podcast devoted to the beauty and power of the slam dunk. For these and more, search Sports Documentaries on TuneIn. With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games.
Bergeron, he scores!
With game replay on TuneIn, you can listen to every power play, slap shot, and goal of the 2019-2020 season so far.
Suter to Cunningham to Fiala, he scores!
And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search classic game replays to start listening.
.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. There you have it. Sound of the closing bell at the New York Stock Exchange. As we wrap up trading on the first, the day of June, folks from Health Trust and Meals on Wheels ringing that closing bell. The Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing, holding on to gains with the S&P at the close up 11 at 3,055. That is a gain of 0.4%. 91-point jump today for the Dow Jones Industrial Average, up 0.4%. NASDAQ higher by 62 for the NASDAQ Composite Index, a gain there of about 0.7%. 10-year down 132nd with a yield of 0.65%. Gold up 0.6%, $17.39 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude above $35 a barrel, $35.60, up today by 0.3%. Stocks rose. Investors focused on signs of economic recovery amid further tension with China, lackluster virus drug test results, and the threat of further civil unrest in the United States. Now, as for the overall market backdrop, we spoke with Emily Rowland, co-chief investment strategist at John Hancock Investment Management.
Really, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is markets are reacting to this incredible amount of fiscal and monetary stimulus that we've seen. You know, the Fed balance sheet is now sitting near $7 trillion. That's a 30% increase in just 3 months. Europe's getting its act together in terms of providing stimulus. Japan. So we continue to see this incredible support that's really outweighing all these challenges and uncertainty that continues to face the markets today.
She was interviewed right here on Bloomberg Business Week. Gun stocks among the day's big movers. Sturm Ruger shares up 9.4%. As for Smith & Wesson, it was up 15.1%. Also rallying today, Vista Outdoor up today by 9.8%. Again, recapping here, equities higher across the board. S&P up 11, up 0.4. The Dow up 91, up 0.4. NASDAQ up 62, up by 0.7%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Your next move will be your last.
Nobody move a muscle.
Damn, Stippy, you got the move.
And I'm moving on, moving from town to town. Time is money. Let's go. Come on, move it. Shake it up. Shake it up.
Bloomberg Business Week. Movers and Shakers with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, time to take a look at some of the stocks on the move in the Monday trade. Let's go big picture. S&P 500, 349 names in the index higher today, 154 lower, 2 unchanged. If I take a look at the 11 major industry groups in the S&P 500, Jason, almost everything was higher. Real estate at the top, followed by energy and financials. Bottom of the pack, healthcare, they were down about 1% there. Information technology, some of those stocks that have really been on the move since the lows, they were pretty much unchanged, but fairly broad-based in terms of today's session.
Yeah, definitely a recovery trade for sure. And I mean, you had some specific names that were moving, but the fact that you had a retail name and a tourism name, actually 2 retail names, I get. Well, Cody's not really a retail name. Gap is your number 2 gainer. That was up 11%. I mean, it's been beat up pretty significantly over the course of the year, as Dave Wilson pointed out at the top of the show.
Cody's always kind of a story unto its own.
Yeah,
I just got to say, I feel like if you want to pick one of the most volatile stocks, I feel like it's been Cody. And we understand why, right?
And Norwegian Cruise Lines, that's been another big volatile name over the course of this pandemic for sure. But that was your 3rd biggest gainer, up better than 10%.
I got to mention Pfizer, number 1 decliner in the S&P 500, down about 7% in today's trade. One of the most widely prescribed antidepressants in the U.S. has fallen into short supply as demand increases due to mental health strains caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're talking about Pfizer's Zoloft falling into shortage. And so it's interesting, the FDA adding Zoloft tablets to the list of drugs in shortage on Friday. So that's one of the stories that's out there.
Well, I mean, that's bad news for for shareholders, but also just bad news for society. Let's be honest. I mean, the fact that that's a reflection of clearly like the state of mind, the sort of collective state of mind here in the country and in the world. And it doesn't seem to be getting any better from that perspective. So despite the fact that there's some enthusiasm on the broader stock market that we've been talking about a lot, there's not a lot changing for lots of people. I mean, that's the thing that I keep coming back to. And I mean, not to take a huge turn, but, you know, we are still in the midst of a global pandemic. We are still in an economy that is largely shut down. And even as things start to reopen, you know, you have New Jersey going into phase 2. You know, by the same token, you have New York City imposing a curfew. You know, tonight. And from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. And I know we've talked about it. And it is similar to some actions that are happening in the nation's capital as well. But, you know, these major cities having to go into lockdown for entirely different reasons than they were a few weeks ago. And does make you stop and think.
Kind of ironic, right, that we were just beginning to open up. And then to see these cities and areas be shut down. I want to go back to Gap because you mentioned it. And there was actually a call out by JP Morgan. They raised the rating on the stock to neutral, price target of $11 a share. And JP Morgan cited the stock's approximate 70% decline since his October 2018 downgrade. Yeah, exactly. And he's talking about potential green shoots for the company. So he said the Old Navy concept is well positioned to benefit from growth in value retail as recession-resistant concept, while the Athleta brand is in this, quote, sweet spot of health, wellness, and casual.
Yeah.
So, if we think about, and this is something I think you and I keep trying to get with our conversations, okay? So we will come back. We know that. But what will life be like and what will be in demand, right? We talked to all these wellness fitness folks and all of the online digital, like how much of that sticks around. And so we're starting to see Wall Street start to come out and say, here's what we think is going to do well or better than others.
And people are going to be working out, or they're going to be working at home wearing yoga pants, right?
I got to say, I've been, it's either yoga or jeans right now.
Yeah. If I could,
I'm kind of loving it.
If I could go long T-shirts, I would. That is for sure. All right, so let's take a quick look at volatility. It was an interesting day.
Yeah.
The VIX actually up just a touch, not a huge amount, a little less than 3%, closing at 28.32. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Dave, you're up.
Hi, my name is Dave.
Wilson, where are you? Wilson!
Just what do you think you're doing, Dave?
We're going for a price on Wilson.
Open up the door, it's Dave. Who? Dave.
Hey, Mr. Wilson. Dave Wilson back with his stock of the day. And Dave, your ticker is CIR.
That's right, Carol. Circor International. It's a maker of valves, pumps, and other products used in factories, power plants, and oil and gas facilities. The company also supplies components for airplanes and military equipment. Circor was part of another company, Watchwater Technologies, before being spun off in 1999 and getting that ticker CIR. Last year, the company's shares more than doubled. This year, they fell as much as 83% and traded at the lowest price since August 2000. Circor set that low in mid-March. While the shares have struggled to rebound, they gained momentum today with the help of Stifel. The firm almost doubled its 12-month price estimate to $32 and added the company to a select list of top picks. Analyst Nathan Jones wrote that Circor is headed for much improved cash flow in 2021 after exiting some businesses. The company's selling or shutting down parts of its valve operations, and he expects that to be done in the next 2 quarters. Stifel's call sent Circor to its highest price since March 11th. The shares jumped more than 30% to $20.93. Still a far cry from that $32 target price.
Can I just say, though, the stock is still down. Oh, shit, I lost my screen. It was down 54%. Yeah, it's almost 50. It's still down. Even with that 30% jump today, it's still down 55% this year.
Just shows you how badly it got beaten up in the first 3 months.
Oh, my God. Yeah, exactly. But it's a company. I was just looking at the supply chain analysis that plays into a lot of different industries, it looks like. So you can it makes sense to understand why it was beaten up so much. Dave Wilson with his stock of the day. Ticker is CIR. All right. Time to get a check on world and national news headlines. For that, let's turn things over to Ed Baxter in San Francisco. Hi, Ed.
Hi there, Carol. Yeah, getting late word out of New York. Get there in a second, because the top 2 of my questions right now are, will there be more protests across the U.S. tonight? The second is, how big will they be and how to handle them? Well, the answer to the first seems to be yes. And in New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo plans a curfew tonight beginning at 11 o'clock to address any potential looting.
Use that outrage to actually make a change and have the intelligence to say what changes you actually want. Otherwise, it's just screaming into the wind.
So the curfew, 11 o'clock tonight to 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. And that message echoed in California, with Governor Gavin Newsom saying that it is time to seriously address the racism that exists despite promises and more promises. In San Francisco, Mayor London Breed says she is tired of people saying Black Lives Matters is a joke, but she says the violence of the demonstrations is twisting the message.
But for those of you who are using this movement as a way to push violence, to go after other Black people, to tear us down, we will not tolerate that. Don't get it twisted.
Meanwhile, President Donald Trump, in a telephone conference with the governors, called most of them weak and said they need to step up now.
What went on last night in Los Angeles with the stores and the storefronts is terrible. No domination. You have to dominate.
And he says New York is a disgrace. In Washington, D.C., the mayor's worried the demonstrations will reignite coronavirus cases. In San Francisco, I'm Ed Baxter. This is Bloomberg.
the markets. No, you can't just run screaming from the room.
A lot of economists are just throwing up their hands and saying, we don't know.
But you don't have to manage this alone.
What are you looking at to give you some sort of compass through this period?
Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney.
What is your early read as to the scope and scale of this plan?
Bloomberg Markets, weekday mornings at 10 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
1 in 3 adults has prediabetes. 1 in 3. That means it could be you, your football buddy, your football buddy, or you, your best man, your worst man, you, your dog walker, your cat jogger. While 1 in 3 adults has prediabetes, with early diagnosis, prediabetes can be reversed. Take the risk test at doihaveprediabetes.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and its Prediabetes Awareness Partners.
It's a stock market driver.
Now they're starting to see a little bit of panic from policymakers.
It's a global political force.
How will this epidemic reshape big tech and its relationship with Washington?
It's a virus.
This coronavirus is a global pandemic.
Is there a safe haven?
And the facts matter.
The situation is so bad because of the virus that is simply unavoidable.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Listen, as a hiring manager, I've got to tell you, the best job candidate isn't always the typical candidate. Sometimes they're a grad of life.
Meet the grads of life. Young adults of unique determination and experience. An ideal fit for your company in an entry-level position, internship, or mentorship. They might not have every qualification you typically look for, but they're exactly who your company needs.
Sometimes the best candidates aren't the ones you're used to.
Go to gradsoflife.org to learn how to find, cultivate, and train this great pool of untapped talent. Brought to you by the Ad Council and gradsoflife.org.
Are you interested in a challenging and exciting career? One where you can be part of solving complex challenges across industries and geographies? Bloomberg's ever-expanding technology, data, news, and media services foster innovation, empower clients, and offer nearly limitless opportunities for career growth. Visit Bloomberg.com/careers today to view our current job opportunities. Bloomberg LP is an equal opportunity employer. The address once again is Bloomberg.com/careers. The tragedy of coronavirus continues. An entire continent is rocked to its core.
This is a wave that's crashed around the world.
Where is the information that's both local and global?
Do you expect loan losses to rise at European banks?
Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Do you see any signs of stabilization in the global economy?
Accurate everywhere. Weekdays at 1 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
At Bloomberg, we know a lot of financial experts.
He's a former president of the European Central Bank.
Your Global Financial Warriors is a classic textbook.
A lot of political experts.
If you were advising the President of the United States, what's the thing that he's not doing that he should do?
And lucky for you, we know a lot of science experts, too.
You talked about those reagents which are necessary for the testing.
It's also the behavioral psychological approach.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
What's the true value of your custodial relationship? Ben Harrison of BNY Mellon's Pershing explains.
As sophisticated investors demand more from their advisors, advisory firms, in turn, need to rely on their custodian to help them grow their complex businesses. At BNY Mellon's Pershing, supporting the rapid growth of RIAs is our number one priority. We understand what it means to deliver true value to our clients who are looking for a custodian that is aligned with their best interest and delivers high-value solutions, all in an open architecture environment with flexibility, choice, and transparency. Learn why so many of the largest advisory firms turn to us for the financial strength, resiliency, and high-touch service that BNY Mellon Pershing provides. When you work with Pershing, we put your business first. Can your custodian say that?
Learn more at Pershing.com or call 800-445-4467. Pershing Advisor Solutions, LLC. Member FINRA SIPC.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. It was an up day on Wall Street with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing today. Investors focused on signs of economic recovery. S&P 500 index up 11 to 3,055, a gain of 0.4%. The Dow advanced 91 points, also up 0.4. NASDAQ up 62, a gain of 0.7%. 10-year down 3/32 with a yield of 0.66%. Gold up $8 the ounce today, $17.39, up 0.5%. Crude holding above $35 a barrel, $35.57, up 8 cents. That was a gain of 0.2%. Again, recapping, equities higher today. Investors focusing on reopening and an improving economy. S&P up 11, a gain there of 0.4%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly, Carol Masser. Well, it's interesting to see all the impacts of this coronavirus on various levels of investing. What are we going to take from this? How is our behavior going to change? What sort of companies are we going to be looking at? And is it going to accelerate trends that were already out there? Gil Moscato, the head of ESG for American Century Investments. He joins us on the phone from New York City. So, G, did I completely butcher your name there?
No, it's fine. Thanks so much for having me.
No. You need to say it.
You say it for us so that we know in the future.
Guillaume Moscato.
There we go. All right, Guillaume. I can do that. Yeah, Guillaume Moscato. There we go. All right. Thank you. Thank you for teaching us. All right, so where are we when it comes to ESG? Because I feel like this could be this great moment where everybody kind of finds religion and says, oh, actually, we should care about where our money is going. We should care about the planet. We should care about all these things that maybe we've ignored for too long. Am I overly optimistic here?
No, I think you're right. Against the backdrop of the COVID-19, American Century Investments has identified three major ESG implications, and one of them is that, within the ESG trilogy, right, the S pillar all of a sudden is gaining a lot of attraction. But it's not to say that before it wasn't. It's just now the pandemic is really bringing the importance for investors to consider these more qualitative indicators as a gauge of long-term company competitiveness, such as human capital and also operational integrity, like business continuity, right? These indicators before were kind of not really quantifiable or perceived as difficult to quantify. And now, as a result of the pandemic, investors are like, hey, you know what? This could actually have material implications to the companies in which I'm investing in. So what kind of framework is my manager applying in order to make sure that those issues are well accounted for in terms of the fundamental research process?
You're so right that, Guillaume, that part of the problem has been how do you quantify that? So what are we learning here that makes it, that's going to give us a procedure or process or metric to quantify it going forward?
Sure. We have three indicators that we came up with. First is to really understand, in terms of emergency response mechanisms, right, what kind of process the companies are implementing. Telecommunicating, distributed management are a good example. Things around supply chain controls, right? Quality and safety of the supply chain. Are you dependent more on local producers relative to global producers? Also, in terms of employee benefits, right? Do you have a paid sick leave policy? Do you have health and well-being programs? Short-time work. In fact, short-time work has been really useful in Germany, and during the 2008 crisis, they've done quite well. Also, things like telemedicine. So now we actually have indicators to help investors get a better sense of how the companies they're invested in are actually adapting to this new era of the working from home, if you will.
How do I want to break in for a second, because we had a really smart conversation with John Hope Bryan, who's the founder, chairman, and CEO of Operation Hope, and he said, you know, because we've said so many companies have implemented programs that talk about equality, diversity, you know, making sure that there's equal access. And he said, you know, you've got to reimagine your budget. Where are your ad dollars? Where are your internships going? You know, he said what's going on in Minneapolis is about poverty. So how do companies, right, who you're right, have put in these great programs, and yet we still have a lot of gaps and inequalities within our society? So how do you make it, how do you push the needle on this?
It's a good question. So, of course, what's happening right now in the United States is definitely, in our opinion, something tragic that needs to be addressed. But we believe it goes a little bit beyond the scope of investments, right? So it's more around, you know, political issues that are definitely important, but might be a bit difficult to reconcile with a fundamental bottom-up research process when we look at companies. That being said, when it comes to the workforce renewal and the competitiveness of companies, you know, human capital must be at the center of it all, right? As more and more companies become technologically focused or knowledge-based, people will become the primary assets. And so therefore, companies that before would not necessarily think about things like how to ensure my workforce renewal, how to develop my people, how to make sure that, you know, I address gender pay gap, I address diversity and inclusion. All of these elements now are going to move away, in our opinion, from a process called corporate social responsibility to actual business strategy. So we're going to say, look, it's not just enough to tell us that you have a program for diversity. We want to know how exactly is this factoring in your business strategy. And a lot of companies are doing that. You just have to find the right one.
And so how much do you worry, Guillaume, that this is the sort of thing, just to be devil's advocate here, that in an age where people are just trying to survive, that this falls away?
Well, I'm not sure I understand your question when you say this falls away when people are trying to survive.
Basically, people are trying, you know, we have invested heavily in diversity initiatives and all of these sorts of things, but you have companies that have no room for error. They're laying off workers. They can't invest in new programs. How much do you worry, and unfortunately we only have about 30 seconds, that this stays top of mind?
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that ESG investors will have to make sure that it does. Keep on top of the agenda. And I think here executive compensation will be heavily scrutinized in the next proxy season, because if you're giving bonuses for cutting down a lot of costs, and it has a pretty bad social implication, then investors are going to know, you know, how those dollars allocated to maintaining an equilibrium within a company.
Especially when you say human capital is so important. If you're not sharing that wealth with your workers, then it's just talk, and it's not actually initiative or plans being put into action. Guillaume, thank you so much for your thoughts and your insights, and especially making it relevant with what's going on. And thank you for clarifying how to pronounce your name. It is Monday, Guillaume Mascoto. Not so difficult.
Yeah.
It's my Monday brain.
You nailed it. Good job. He's the head of ESG over at American Century Investments, joining us on the phone from New York City. Coming up, we're going to head down south, talk to the new AD down at Vanderbilt. This is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Stocks began the week with modest gains, overcoming civil unrest around the country and rising tensions between the U.S. and China. The Dow Jones Industrial Average climbed 92, the S&P gained 11, the Nasdaq rose 62. Ongoing protests around the U.S. are forcing postponements of a number of high-profile corporate events. Sony's news conference for its upcoming PlayStation 5 is on hold, as is an Electronic Arts event to introduce the Madden NFL 21 video game. With self-defense top of mind for many Americans, pepper spray has become a must-have item on Amazon. A canister of Sabre Max Police Strength pepper spray topped the selling rank today in Amazon's Sports and Outdoors category. Add glassware maker Libby to the list of business casualties from COVID-19. The company, which was already struggling, says the pandemic gutted demand, from food service customers like restaurants and bars. Larry Kofsky, Bloomberg Radio.
Imagine being fired because of who you love. Imagine being denied medical treatment because of who you marry. Imagine being evicted because of who you are. Millions of Americans don't have to imagine this. They have to live it. Because in 31 states, it's legal to discriminate against LGBT people. Get the facts at beyondido.org. Brought to you by the Gill Foundation and the Ad Council.
This Independence Day, it's a Boston Pop salute to our heroes, presented by Bloomberg and Eaton Vance. While the fireworks won't take place this year, the Boston Pop's 4th of July tradition will continue, with new music paying tribute to the heroes of the current health crisis and honoring the memories of those we have lost. Watch and listen July 4th starting at 8 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. COVID-19.
Picture this. Small businesses on eBay are working to
get things moving.
Sending spices to novice cooks.
Hairbands to kids.
Desks for home offices.
Delivering the goods.
Shipping footballs. Fruit trees.
And dishwashers.
Thousands of small businesses on eBay are helping to keep the nation going. They are individually brilliant, stronger as one. Buy, sell, eBay.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Where do sports, culture, and basketball nostalgia collide? On their podcast, Knuckleheads, NBA veterans Quentin Richardson and Darius Miles sit down with athletes, musicians, and entertainers to get brutally honest, totally unguarded conversations about everything from current events to untold stories from the golden era of sports.
O'Neal. You know that, right? I tried to tip dunk off the free throw line one time.
Search Knuckleheads on TuneIn to listen. Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
He does! Fabry wins it!
To standout stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
Looking for your daily fix of NFL news and analysis?
In that. So we had to blow it up into Super Bowl predictions instead.
Look no further than the Pick 6 podcast, where CBS sports writer Will Brinson gets you up to speed with what's trending in the NFL that day, so that you're always in the know.
Yeah, it's pretty revealing of Brinson's methodology for predictions. When he gets mad at people for predicting good teams are going to win the Super Bowl or good players are going to win major awards. That's how you wind up.
Search Pick 6 on TuneIn to listen.
Who says you can't have a laugh while getting serious about America's pastime? On the daily podcast Locked On MLB, comedian and baseball fanatic Paul Francis Sullivan talks about each team, each pennant race, and everything else in the game, from rule changes and controversies to baseball cards and stadium food.
For those of you who are not familiar with me or the old show, I love to obsess over baseball. I'm talking baseball over the Super Bowl. We had a TV show in the Division Series during my wedding.
Search Locked On MLB on TuneIn to listen today.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with a podcast on TuneIn. For expert analysis straight from the WWE to Steve Austin's no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen.
The Woj Pod with Adrian Wojnarowski.
Doris, you had reason to believe that you needed to get a test for the coronavirus.
Right. Well, let's just start with the headline, which is I did test positive for COVID-19. I was so tired from Saturday the 14th through Tuesday, March 17th. I kid you not, I could not be out of bed for 5 minutes without needing to go back to bed and lay down.
Search the Woj Pod to listen.
Live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 1061. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
So both of us are really looking forward to this next guest. And we have to thank Michael Ainsley, who's become really a friend of our show. We're going to talk to him later in the week. But he sent this story to us, and it's like, you have got to talk to this individual.
Absolutely. She's the new AD, athletic director down at Vanderbilt. Can't wait to talk to Candace Lee. Coming up in just a few minutes. But first, let's get a check on those business headlines from Charlie Pellet. Hey, Charlie.
I thank you very much. And hello there, Jason Kelly. Do want to begin with Starbucks. It sees lower U.S. store sales until at least the fall. This according to a Dow Jones report, which says Starbucks is paring back worker hours, also encouraging workers to take unpaid leave until September. Again, those headlines from Dow Jones. Shares of Starbucks lower after hours, down by about 0.1%. And up Monday, first trading a day of the brand new month of June. How did we get here so quickly? Stocks higher today as investors focus on signs of economic recovery amid further tension with China, lackluster virus drug test results, and spreading protests over the killing of George Floyd. He was the unarmed black man by police. Dollar slump. Now, as for the overall market backdrop, David Harrow is deputy chair at Harris Associates.
If you were to look at my area, international value, I mean, this is probably the worst 4 or 5 months I've had in 34 years. And it's the companies aren't just falling apart and going bankrupt. A lot of these businesses are actually going to come out of this just fine and doing very well. And yet they're still down 30, 40, or 50% year to date. And to us, this really represents opportunity.
The 10-year yield, 0.66%. Gold up 0.5%, $17.39 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.3%, $35.59 a barrel. A move higher for a lot of airline stocks today. Among some of those names, the 4 biggest carriers, UAL up by 5.1%. American Airlines Group up 5.8%. Delta was up 3.8%. Southwest shares up today by 4.7%. Gold up 0.5%, $17.39 the ounce. And crude oil up 0.3%, $35.59 a barrel. Recapping equities higher across the board with the S&P up 11, up 0.4%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, it is indeed. Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. Well, our next guest was recently named Vanderbilt University's first female athletic director and the first African-American woman to head an SEC athletics program. We're talking about Candace Story Lee, well known to the Vanderbilt organization as both a student athlete and as a sports administrator at the school, and we are delighted to have with us. There's so much more I could talk to you about her background, but we do want to get into our conversation. Candace, welcome to Bloomberg Business Week Radio. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
And I have to say congratulations on your appointment. And we do want to talk to you about your plans and hopes for sports at Vanderbilt. I've got to, though, ask you about what happened in Minneapolis when you first heard about it. You saw the video with George Floyd. What did you think?
Oh, man. I thought what a tragedy that could have been and should have been avoided. And it was heartbreaking. It was very difficult to watch. I will admit that I have not been able to watch all. I know it's 7 or 8 minutes long. I have not made it through that entire video. I mean, I've seen clips, and it's traumatizing. Yeah. So I would say that, my reaction was the reaction of, I think, so many of us, that it was unnecessary. It was unnecessary.
And Candace, you have a responsibility, as so many do, to, young people who are ultimately in your care. You are catching them at an incredibly important and formative age. How do you take what's going on in the country and you think about your role being as important as it ever was, more important maybe than it ever was, as you think about the young folks that you're trying to counsel through all of this? We're all thinking about it as parents, I know, and obviously you see it through a different lens than I do.
I like how you phrased the question, because you're right that it is the care of our student athletes that is our priority. And I think that in some ways, you feel helpless when you see a situation like this, and you start racking your brain, and it stirs up a lot of emotions. And then I start thinking about how, not that I have a ton of experience, but if you imagine being a college student and trying to process that and make sense of it, how intimidating and overwhelming that must be. And I think the thing that we have to do is just start with transparency and authenticity. Those are the things I talked with our student athletes about over the weekend. Same with our staff. It's a chance to really be vulnerable and wrestle with this together. I don't have all the answers, and I'm real clear about that. But I do want our student athletes to understand that we can provide them with a safe space to explore how they're feeling. And we want to equip them with, it's hard to make sense of something that's just tragic. It's hard to make sense of that. But what I hope is that our student athletes will feel like they can make a difference. Like if they're convicted about this topic or anything that they're passionate about, that they'll use their platform to really affect change and do it in a healthy way. The thing I think that many of us wrestle with, or many people wrestle with, when you're just so heartbroken over something, and it's hard to understand why people do certain things. How can you mobilize people to want to make a change, but not be so frustrated that you paralyze, or not have a hard heart? Right. And that's I think that's a challenge for all of us, but I know that's a challenge when you're 18, 19, 20 years old. And it's a privilege to be able to be with folks when they're developing their ideas and they're building a foundation, but it's also a huge responsibility, because they look to us.
Right.
You talked about the care. They look to us for that guidance. So, we need to do it in the most healthy and balanced way.
Well, we've got about a minute, and then we're going to come back and continue our conversation, because I am also curious, Candace, and we do want to get into what your plans are at Vanderbilt and your hopes and expectations. But I do wonder about what is the role and responsibility of sports as an activist and agent for change, especially coming off of the last few years, Colin Kaepernick, and so many professional athletes who were I feel like reined in. No doubt about it, or penalized for kind of speaking out. So we're going to continue our conversation. With us is Vanderbilt's athletic director, Candace Lee. She's joining us on the phone from Nashville, Tennessee. And so, Jason, we'll get back to that conversation. But it's been, I think about some of the things that we've done, the NBA All-Star Tech Summit and, being at the Super Bowl. We've talked about this a lot, right. and what the responsibility is for something, whether it's sports or entertainment, in terms of being an agent for change.
And I think being in Nashville is an important note, too. And it takes me back to what John Hope Bryant was saying about Atlanta. And, Nashville in many ways is a very similar city. It's a boom town. There's a huge amount of economic opportunity.
Yeah.
And how do you ensure that you are sort of growing and caring for a generation of leaders who are willing and enthusiastic to take all that on? We're going to get into that and much more in just a minute. First, let's get to Ed Baxter on the West Coast. He's got world and national headlines. Ed.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Starting where you are, New York City will have a curfew in place effective 11 p.m., lasting until 5 tonight and over morning. Governor Andrew Cuomo says he understands the issues, but
this is not persuading government officials to change. This is not helping end coronavirus. We have to be smart.
Meanwhile, here in California, Governor Gavin